Good afternoon. I'm David Odie,
I'm Mark DeFee.
and we realize it may not be afternoon where you are, but here in Denver, it is moments past noon o'clock and well into the afternoon for our audiences in New York and Baltimore. And this event is called An Afternoon of Hope.
Yes.
So yes, good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon. Yes. Today is World Suicide Prevention Day, so there might be people joining us where it's the middle of the night. We don't know, but this is an important day. It was started 21 years ago by the International Association of Suicide Prevention, as well as the World Health Organization. So we greatly appreciate you joining us today.
And today we may very well have an international audience. In fact, let's take a moment and find out where our audience members are located. So you're about to see a QR code. We invite you to take out your phone, turn on the camera, and point it at that screen, and you'll have an opportunity to tell us where you are located. Now, if you're on Zoom, this is even easier. Just type your location into the Zoom chat. If that's not convenient for you, use the QR code or the link that is here on the screen. And what we'll do is over the next few moments, we'll be accumulating on a map where people are located as you're attending this afternoon. And we'll show you those results in just a moment.
Awesome. And speaking of Zoom, if you're part of the Zoom audience, which I think we're currently over 100 people, which is fantastic. Thank you for being here. But to keep us more connected, if you could be on camera, that would be great, because that way everyone else can see that there are real people concerned about this topic out there. And we also have someone who will be monitoring the chat. So in case we see any questions, comments, if there are any concerns that are triggered, we can help with that. And Marty Dickinson will be the virtual host for us today.
While those results are coming in and populating our map, let's consider why we're here and set some expectations for the afternoon. Why are we investing 3 hours of our time? What can you expect from the 9 speakers joining us from 7 different cities? And why are the folks in Baltimore the only ones getting crab cakes?
That is absolutely a great question about the crab cakes. But let's clarify expectations right now. So we're here because of a very serious topic, suicide, and its implications, its challenges, and most of all, its prevention. And so we will never lose sight of that today.
And at the same time, although the topic is serious, I can choose not to take myself too seriously. So if you will give me permission not to take myself too seriously, I give you permission to laugh when something delights you. In 3 hours of content on such a heavy topic, you're going to need a release of tension from time to time. As you're going to learn later on, someone very close to me has taught me you've got to feel all the feels.
Yeah.
When you commit to letting yourself feel all the feels this afternoon, those feels may take you in some surprising directions. You may feel sad. No need to bottle that up. We've got boxes of tissues here.
Yeah.
I hope you have some handy wherever you are. You may also feel delight when you hear some of the solutions that some of our speakers are going to describe.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. This is an afternoon of hope. And so we are going to need those surfacing moments. Sitting in this heavy topic for 3 hours is going to be difficult, but it's possible that someone might feel triggered by something that's occurring this afternoon. And if that happens, we want to remind you about 2 resources. One is 988. This is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and Corporate Counseling Associates, one of the sponsors for this event, has opened up a phone line for the next 7 days for anybody who might be struggling right now and who needs some additional support. And so we're going to be talking about that later, but just real quickly, that phone number is 855-242-5061. It has licensed clinicians who will work with you right then and help you get stabilized and figure out next steps for you. So please take a moment. Look around, whether virtually or here in person. Assure yourself that you're in a safe place, and it is okay to feel all the feels.
And speaking of places, I wonder if John can show us the map of where people are joining us from this afternoon. We are coast to coast, aren't
Yes,
we?
we are. Look at that, 32.
Look at that 32. That must be in
I think
the Baltimore
that's
area,
Baltimore,
D.C.
yep.
area. How about that? Okay. And we got people all over the place. I see Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina.
North Carolina, yep. Chicago representing. Cincinnati, Mike Shaw, I saw you there.
And we
Ooh.
even have someone joining us from Western Europe.
Oh, wow, 4 people from there.
4 people in Western Europe. So we're so glad that you're joining us for the afternoon of hope.
Yes, thank you. And in a moment, you're going to see where our speakers are joining us from. But before we go there, however, it's important that we acknowledge our sponsors and who are making this event possible. And foremost among those sponsors is a company called Corporate Counseling Associates, or CCA. And I actually work for that organization. I am so proud that we have invested this time and money and resources into today to make it a great event. It's going to be different than you've normally experienced. Like David just said, we have 9 speakers over 3 hours. And so we're going to be hitting on a lot of topics, things you might not consider, but this is important. And so I'm just so proud that Corporate Counseling Associates allowed me to come together with this idea and put it, breathe life into it, I guess.
That's right. Breathe life into it. That's a good way to put it. Other sponsors that we want to mention include United Suicide Survivors International, the Chinstein O'Malley Sven Foundation, and Centennial Peaks Hospital and Highlands Behavioral Health here in Denver.
Yes, and we also want to acknowledge those entities who've made it possible to partner or to gather in person, I guess. So that includes Baruch College in New York, the School of Social Work at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and here in Denver, the Village Workspace and Event Center, who have bent over backwards to accommodate our setup to make this a highly coordinated, highly produced event.
That's right. They certainly have. They've been great hosts. And speaking of locations, let's go around and have a quick hello from all the sites where we have speakers we will be hearing from. In San Antonio, Texas, we have John Ebron. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for being here, John. And in Fort Worth, Texas, we have Dr. Charles Williams. Good afternoon, Dr. Williams.
Good afternoon, Mark and David.
In Minneapolis, Minnesota, we have Elisha Engelin. Good afternoon, Elisha.
Mark and David.
And in Baltimore, Maryland, we have Dr. Jody Jacobson Fry with a live audience there in Baltimore. So, Baltimore, thank you for joining us. If it's okay, on the count of 3, a big good afternoon. 1, 2, 3.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. All right.
That was great. And not to be outdone, in New York City, we have 2 speakers, Dr. Jay Sandys and Dr. Jeff Gardier. New York, how about a wave and a hello on the count of 3? 1, 2, 3.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
We'll come back to all of you shortly. Thank you for being here and for standing by. I know our audience is eager to get into the content you came here for. Mark, why don't you tell us just a bit about your own background in crisis management and why you felt that important connection to our first speaker.
Yeah, thank you. And David and I come to this topic from different perspectives. I am a licensed clinician by training, and for the first 10 years or so of my career, I was doing crisis intervention and stabilization, working with people who truly had the means in their hand to take their own life. And it was my role to support them through that moment, to help them make the decision that there's more to life that they want to pursue. And I was very honored to sit with people in that moment where they didn't know what they wanted, but they knew they wanted someone to give them hope. And it's a difficult place to be, which is why when we were putting the lineup together, we knew John had to go first because we wanted to start by talking to the people out there who are struggling right now with thoughts of suicide. We want you to know that you are not alone, and it is something that you can move beyond, just like John did.
We just said hello to John a moment ago in San Antonio. He'll be our first speaker today. John is a certified master mindset life and behavioral consultant who has run several suicide prevention and intervention programs for the United States Army and is himself a survivor of suicidal ideation. When you hear his inspiring story of how he made it through some of the darkest times in his life, you'll be inspired as he was to find hope to live again. Please welcome, joining us live from San Antonio, Texas, John Ebron.
Thank you so much, Mark and David. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a bit of my story because our stories are, as I like to say, completely different and absolutely the same, right? So there's elements into all of the things that we're experiencing, particularly those who may be challenged right now with suicidal ideation. And I want you to hear this. If you hear nothing else, you are not alone. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my struggle, my turning point, my breaking point, and then how I began to get on this road of healing and recovery through the things that I learned connecting with others. So as Mark and David did mention, I am a proud service veteran. I got the opportunity to serve 20 years in the United States Army's Chaplains Corps, and I served as what we called a master resilience trainer for 10 of my 20 years as well. So this has always been an area of my life where I've been engaged in providing support to others. To add to my story, however, I'm also a proud member of the LGBTQIA community. And as a gay service member, I spent 16 of my 20 years under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So if you could think about it from this perspective, I was kind of in a trap where I was to serve and support, but was illegal, at least in my mind, to request support when I needed it the most. So there, I found myself in this deep, dark area of despair where I really began to feel lonely, although I'm a part of the largest team in the world, right? So that's one of the first things I wanted to share with you is that regardless of where you're at, it is possible to feel alone, even if you're surrounded by people. And it's important that we learn how to check in with ourselves, honor who we are, and recognize when we're not where we want to be, how we want to be in our lives. We deserve, every person listening to me today deserves to be healthy, happy, and whole. And when we get out of that state of being for a long period of time, the options to live life in a thriving way feel like they're stripped away, down to a degree that we even may consider taking our own lives. So I want to encourage you that once you feel yourself out of alignment, to know that there is hope. One, two, know that there are people that care for you. Three, and that you should, with veracity, move into your strategies of self-care and allowing yourself to be supported on personal and professional levels. So let me tell you a little bit about my struggle. Again, being in this place of loneliness and despair, what I learned is that loneliness creates levels of despair. And someone may be experiencing that today, where not only are they experiencing loneliness, but they're experiencing guilt for feeling lonely. And they're feeling, on top of that guilt, an inability to connect with other people, and then a sense of judgment for not being able to connect. And it snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. And we may feel as though what we're experiencing is an indication of what we deserve. Again, I want you to grab hold to hope as you listen to the speakers today, as you learn more about what is available to us as being a part of a collective. I want you to grab hold of hope. And I want you to know that you have total permission to reach beyond what you're experiencing and cling to what you deserve. So for me, the breaking point, living in this despair for so long, I found myself not being able to function, although I had those same responsibilities on my shoulder, right? So for me, it climaxed during a deployment, my final deployment while I was in the military. I was deployed in Afghanistan with incredible responsibilities on my shoulders and feeling as though I had no support system. So that I had to carry that burden on my own. And as you can imagine, it compound, and it weighed and weighed on me to the degree that I found myself one day in my little rack, in my little hooch, with my 9mm in my mouth, wanting to end it all. Now, this was the turning point for me because, as happenstance would have it, and whatever else is at play, my roommate happened to walk in just as I was planning to make a permanent decision about a temporary situation. He, as a battle buddy, as a brother, as a friend, loved me back to life. And what I learned is that when I don't have the strength on my own, I can borrow the strength from the community that I'm a part of. So that began to open up this idea that living life is actually possible for someone like me. And again, I want to share hope with you that if you're feeling in despair, I want you to know that living life is possible for you, not just surviving, but thriving. We got to hang on to hope. So finally, as I got ready to end my career, one of my units was holding what we called a mental health unit readiness inventory, right? A lot of words. What it really meant was we're just checking in to see how everyone is doing. Simple survey where people will begin to express how they've been feeling over the past 12 months. And about question 99 of this 100-question survey, there was a question that asked, have you ever considered committing suicide over the past 12 months? And for me, that was an opportunity, one of the safest opportunities for me to actually reach out for help. And lo and behold, that survey led into several opportunities for senior leaders to wrap their arms around me, literally, and cry with me and be with me and empathize with me and help me to recognize that if I reach out, support is there. And if there's options that I can't see, maybe my support system can help me see things that are not currently in my view. So I just want to share a little bit of my story today because now I'm thriving, right? Now I'm happy. But all of that came on the cusp of not giving up. So if you're feeling in despair today, if you're feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders, I want you to know that there's hope. I want you to cling to everything you get to hear and to experience today. I want you to know that you're not alone and that you can come out on the other side of this thriving, healthy, happy, and whole. So thank you again for the opportunity. I really appreciate this time. And now I want to give it back to you, Mark and Dave.
Wow, that was really, really moving.
Yeah, thank you, John.
So incredibly moving, so incredibly vulnerable, telling about those experiences.
Yeah.
And, the theme I picked up from that was the importance of connection.
Yes.
And reaching out.
Yeah, and being okay doing that.
Yeah.
And I mean, you and I both made like a little when he said it, that line of, my friend loved me back to life.
Yes.
God, what a great
that
phrase
line.
there, John. So,
You know, my heart broke a little bit when he said, there he was, a member of the largest organization in the world, feeling lonely.
feeling lonely.
And
Yeah.
disconnected.
Yeah. But to hear the people that wrap themselves around him.
Yes, that's right.
To love him back to life was just such a great story and a great way to kick off today. So thank you, John, for being here. We greatly appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Thank you, John. You, Mark, told me one time about something that happened, I believe it was early in your career in crisis intervention, with someone who was suicidal, and an interesting and unexpected response from that person's family member.
It was my very first actively suicidal client. I was still in graduate school doing counseling for the Colorado State Employee Assistance Program, and I just had this feeling. It was our third session. I remember it vividly because I had kind of a baseline for her, and she was just off. And so I had to go get my supervisor, who was in a couples counseling session, and said, I need you to come here to assess this individual. We both determined that if she left that day, she would end her life. And so we couldn't allow her to leave. We asked her who we should contact. She gave us the name of a family member, actually her brother. And I wasn't expecting what happened next. We called her brother. My supervisor explained what was happening. And let me start by saying first, this brother wasn't a bad person.
Right.
This brother wasn't, I didn't get any maliciousness off of him, but when he heard that his sister was again experiencing symptoms of suicide, he said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? She does this every time. We're about to go on vacation, my family and I, and every time we try and leave, every time we try and go do something, she pulls this card. And he was like, and I'm done. Just call 911, call emergency services. And so we had to talk to him about, if we really go down that route, it's going to be much more difficult for everyone involved. We know this is impacting the plans you have for you and your family, but you need to be here. And he understood that. Once he calmed down, once he got to a better headspace, he recognized, yes, my first response was a knee-jerk, emotional one. I need to be there for my sister. But it highlights a good point about the fact that someone struggling with suicide, it might be an ongoing thing that you're supporting them with. And that's something we need to expect, something we need to understand is going to be part of this journey and not just a one-time conversation and then, hey, everything's great again. This is something that's going to be ongoing for us. So tell us a little bit more about what's next.
Well, I really resonated with that story you told when I heard about what Dr. Jeff Gardere is going to be talking to us about.
Yeah.
He has encountered a lot of situations like the one you described. He is a board-certified clinical psychologist, author, media professional, and a professor of behavioral medicine and clinical training at Touro University Medical School and Psychology Graduate School. So he'll be joining us from New York. Let's go to New York. Good afternoon, Jeff.
Good afternoon, Jeff.
Good afternoon, Mark and David. How are you?
Doing well,
Doing fantastic.
In his practice, Dr. Gardere has often dealt with patients who have experienced mental health challenges, including suicidal ideations and attempts. He knows, and you may know as well, that it's often difficult to help people. It can be frustrating, especially to family and friends. It can be too easy to label someone who is troubled as troubling. The challenge is to see them not as a pain, but in pain. Today, you'll learn from Dr. Gardere how you can emotionally process those frustrations so you can validate and support others while also taking care of yourself. Please welcome, joining us from New York City, Dr. Jeff Gardere.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you everyone out there. And of course, wishing you the best on World Suicide Prevention Day. It's a very special day, but it's a day that many of our families and friends have to live with, of course, in working with their deserving loved ones who go through these areas and these ideas of suicidal ideation, perhaps having a history of suicidal behaviors. And it's a very difficult road for the families and for that family member in need. And so I'm here to address that because, as you heard from Mark, the young man who felt, oh my goodness, my family member acting out, we're ready to take off on this trip and she's doing it yet again. This is something that all of us deal with when we're dealing with someone who is in need, who has mental health challenges. And so I know that as we have that anger, as we have that frustration, which certainly I can validate for you as a clinician and myself, who's had some serious mental health struggles. I've gotten my therapy. I still work on those issues every day. I'm a proud survivor and a victor of mental health issues, but that anxiety is still kicking my butt every day. I've got to tell you that. But, with that being said, it's really important to validate as you go through helping that family member in need or that friend in need, that the frustration turns into anger, that anger turns inevitably into guilt. Why am I feeling this way about this person that I love, about this person who is in need, about this person who is so much worse off than I am? Why am I being selfish? But folks, I'm here to tell you, it's normal. We do it. We're all human beings. Yes, we want to be super beings in what we do in helping our loved ones, but we are just human beings. And look, this is something that is very, very complicated for us. There are so many pressures for us as family members and friends in reaching out, in giving that helping hand, in being there constantly for that person who is in need. For example, we know the emotional arousal that is chronic and constant in caring for that individual who may have an issue. At the times we heard from John, taking care of themselves. And so we step in. But sometimes that emotional arousal has us on fire, body and soul. We just can't seem to tamp it down and be able to get centered and back into ourselves. The time that we spend with that person, the time that's spent on the telephone, that time that's spent in emergency rooms, perhaps putting off vacations completely to care for that loved one, leads to frustration. The sleepless nights, and we know how important sleep can be, the constant worry, not being sure that whatever it is that we've done, the interventions that we've made, is it really enough? Sometimes the cryptic messages that we get, which is really, in many ways, revealing an ambivalence that the person may have about wanting to live or die. But when we hear those messages, we feel that it's some sort of acting out or they're not really serious. Folks, we know they are serious. Any kind of suicidal ideation or gesture is serious, but these things weigh on us. And of course, the fear of what may happen, the fear of a brother, a sister, a son, or a daughter, or person, friend in the family. What's going to happen to them? And therefore, it's very difficult for us to stay grounded. And of course, I know many of you have dealt with this. I've dealt with this as a psychologist, the frustrations of trying to get someone into a psychiatric hospital. You know that story. We don't have beds. Well, we don't really think they're suicidal. Nah, there's nothing wrong with that person. And there you are back again in the emergency room within a few hours. So we know this is complicated. We know this isn't just acting out because we've been through this over and over again, haven't we? Haven't we been in the situation where we see it's not just about the suicidal ideation, it's not just about the gestures, it's not just about the attempts, it's not just something happening on a whim. This is about a comorbidity of a depression or a bipolar disorder or a schizophrenia or substance abuse or some other mental health challenge that becomes overwhelming for our loved ones. We know that quite often people who may have suicidal ideations, who are depressed, a lot of that may be rooted in the trauma. Perhaps it's a physical, emotional, sexual trauma. Perhaps it's being abandoned at a certain age. Perhaps it's something unusual or terrible that has happened to that person. And guess what? We were there. And maybe we were even part of it. And we know, as we heard from John, being part of the LGBTQ plus community, that there are outside pressures, social pressures, that wherein someone is depressed or they're feeling very alone because they're marginalized, because of prejudice, racism, transphobia, or other prejudices against that individual. And then, of course, we can get away with many things, but we can't get away with genetics. And so we have to understand that not only may this person be experiencing a mental health condition from the life that they're in, but also some of it has been predetermined. And we, because of genetics, sometimes hold ourselves responsible. So I think it's really important in focusing in on that individual who may be suicidal, who is a person in need, that we open our hearts as much as we can. And again, I validate each and every one of you in your frustrations, but it's important to focus on the pain of the individual. We know mental health conditions and suicide, it's not about weakness. It's not about a character disorder. It's not about acting out to ruin someone's day or being selfish. It's not an empty cry for help. It's a genuine cry for help, a genuine sign of hope and despair. Mental illness is painful for us to deal with, but imagine the pain that that individual who's going through it is experiencing. So we have to remember that, because that person is not a pain, but in pain. And we have to be there as much as possible. But there are certain things that we can do to buoy ourselves as family members, as friends, as loved ones, as we go through this struggle with that individual. First and foremost, share your frustrations with your loved one, with your partner. Share that anger, the emotion that you're feeling. Talk about it, the power of catharsis, to be able to share with family members your frustrations and their frustrations. And when that person who is in need is feeling better, you can share with them the frustration that perhaps you experienced because you love them so much. Join support groups. CCA has so many resources that they can share with you. Speak to other family members who perhaps have gone through what you've gone through. Speak to family members outside of your family who have gone through this. And it's not just about a bitching session, excuse me, but it's about empowerment strategies. Take shifts, because we have to work as a team when we're working with someone who may be suicidal or in need. You don't have to be the Lone Ranger coming in. Well, I'll do it myself. I'm the responsible one in the family. I'm the father. I'm the mother. I'm the aunt or uncle. I'll do this. I can do it. No. We work as a supportive team, and we take shifts in taking care of that person. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do. Talk to organized groups. Share what we're sharing with you today, because we don't want to be victims. We want to be victors. We want to own what has happened in our lives to our loved one and to us, so that we can all be there for one another. And never, ever, and we do it all the time, I've done it straight up, try to scapegoat that person who is in need. Oh, why is that person the one who's always asking for help? Folks, there are two words we can never forget, because many of us are clinicians: family dynamics. We all contribute in a way. We all must take responsibility in a way for the pain that that individual is in. I know I do it with my own children. We've had our mental health struggles. Did I do enough? Maybe I should have handled it in this particular way. Maybe I can do it better next time. And here's what's even better: I will do it better next time. So it's important as you go through this journey with your loved one, in closing, that you grow your resilience. The resilience to be able to handle these crisis situations without losing your center, because we need for you to be there for that individual, because that individual that you're helping is going to be there for you one day and is going to be there for others. We saw that with John. So self-care is important. Try to get your proper amount of sleep. Try to eat properly. Try to get your exercise and build your spirituality, whatever that may be. Because as we solve each crisis, ladies and gentlemen, it will only make us stronger for the next one, for our loved ones and for ourselves. Because as you've heard from our MCs, this is not just about the destination. This is truly about the journey, and let's make it a healthy one for us, for our loved ones in need, and certainly for all of us as a society. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff. David, I don't know about you. There are so many pieces to that
There were.
I could take away. And another great phrase of we don't want to be victims. We want to be victors.
Victors.
I loved that. I loved the idea that he talked about how we could be frustrated and that frustration can turn to shame later. And the family dynamics piece, it's crucial. It goes back to kind of what
Yes.
John was talking about, connection and relationships. And when we talk about relationships, I mean, nothing stronger than family, really. So,
And some of those relationships can be the hardest ones to reset.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I love the way Dr. Jeff shared his own experience with anxiety beating him down.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's so very vulnerable. You often don't hear that so much from the professionals in the field.
No, absolutely. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, about professionals in the field and healthcare and everything.
That's right, we are. We'll come back to that.
The last thing I'll say that I really appreciate about Dr. Jeff's talk, and that is how we need to be taking care of ourselves.
Yes.
If we're not doing that, we can't be at our best to take care of the people that we care about and that we're concerned about. And I don't think that's a selfish act to say, I need to take care of myself right now. It's almost that, you've probably heard it before, that example of oxygen mask on an airplane. You put it on the little child first and then yourself, because if you're incapacitated, you can't help
I think
anybody
it's
else.
the other way around.
Did I get that wrong? You put it on yourself first.
And then
Yeah.
you choose your favorite child.
Excellent, nailed it. But yes, the point is still the same. You put it on yourself, because without taking care of yourself,
That's right.
you can't help anyone else. So thank you.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
right. So thank you, Dr. Jeff. That was so touching and so welcome.
Yep.
We appreciated that message. One of the topics that we deal with in suicide prevention, aside from self-care and the frustration of dealing with people close to us who are in pain, we also talk about harm reduction.
Yes.
And one of the topics in harm reduction that was new to me was all the work going on in design and architecture. And Mark, you had a chance to go to San Diego
I did.
and and have a very interesting conversation with someone about that. Can you set that up for us?
Absolutely. So I was able to go to San Diego a couple weeks ago to meet with Dr. Judy Davidson, who is a registered nurse as well as a nurse scientist at the University of California, San Diego. And she wasn't able to join us today, but even though she's not here, her message is powerful, and it's around really advocacy. What can we do in our community to improve harm reduction measures, I guess. And so she's going to be talking to us a little bit about how you design structures, buildings, parking garages to make them a little safer, and as well as why this topic is so important to her and so timely now. She spent 30 years in the field as a suicide prevention expert, but she has experienced something that none of us can even imagine, I guess. So let's hear from Judy. And then she will come on. So. Here, I can just try and act it out.
There's a little more silence there than we were expecting.
Yep. Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So we'll come back to Judy. That's the nice thing about having that interview recorded.
Yeah.
It'll still be there.
It'll still be there,
It'll
and we
still
can
be
come
there.
back to it.
All right. So, which means that we have a hand up back here. Do you have a question?
Are you able to share what her experience was?
That's going to be coming up in the video, and so I don't want to steal her thunder, I guess.
That's
so,
right. That's
yeah,
right.
that's part of her story here. So,
Watch him. Pay no attention to me.
okay, cool. Well, thank you. I guess it's just me now. But this is part of what happens, so we just kind of roll with it and make do with the time that we have. And what we're going to be talking about coming up. Well, go ahead.
Well, what we should probably do is give our next speaker a heads up that we're going to be coming to them a little bit
Little bit
early,
late.
and then we'll circle back to the recorded
You wanna
interview
do that?
with Judy
That
later
works
on.
for me,
That's
too.
Right. Sure. So
We are
we are
here.
going to be going to Dr. Jody Jacobson Fry in Baltimore. Are you ready for us, Jody?
We are more than ready.
All
Oh,
right.
that's good. And we even have audio from
Dr.
you.
Fry, yes.
Good afternoon.
Good
Well,
afternoon.
Do we want to? Yeah, let's go right on into her talk.
Okay.
Mark, you want to take that?
Let me take this. I didn't run and get my notes. I thought we had another segment. So we told you today was going to have a workplace slant to it. That's because we spend so much time in the workplace. And if we're not thinking about that setting, that environment, and how we can improve workplace mental health, we're missing a real chance here to make an impact in people's life. But organizations are made up of people, so this really is for everyone. And we thought a good starting place would be to speak with an expert, Dr. Fry, who has a great lay of the land when it comes to the current state of mental health in the workplace, as well as what workplaces are doing to support mental health and suicide prevention among their employees. So to do that, we turn to Dr. Fry in Baltimore. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Fry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark and David, for hosting and putting together this event. And thank you for including the University of Maryland as one of the host sites. Thank you, everybody who came today to learn and support each other as we talk about this topic, and as well to everybody online. So for those of you that know me, and you probably know me as a professor, as a researcher, as a mental health and suicide advocate, but you may not know me as well as a client of mental health services. So I was asked to talk today about trends in the workplace related to mental health and suicide prevention. And instead of giving my traditional academic talk with graphs and charts and research and numbers, I thought I would try to integrate a little bit about trends from what I've experienced both personally and professionally throughout my career. So my goal for today is for you to leave educated and energized. I want to provide you with a roadmap that you can use to make your workplace a more mentally healthy and safe environment. So let's start with the personal. 20 years ago, I was offered my dream job. Can you guess what it was? If you guessed it was being a professor in this very building at the School of Social Work at University of Maryland, you are right. So after a pretty intense interview process, you would think that I would be nothing less than ecstatic. And while my professional life at that time was on the up and up, my personal life was crumbling by the minute. But in fact, the first day I reported here in this building for my job, I had to meet with the Dean for Academics to talk about the program I was hired to chair. And that morning, my spouse at the time had told me he is moving out that day, and in fact would use the time that I was at my new job to move his belongings out of our home. Well, I was very unprepared for that news, and I completely went numb. I had thoughts of despair, thoughts of hopelessness. I had fleeting thoughts that maybe I would just be better off dead. But somehow I managed to drudge myself to the office that day, and I met with my dean, And I don't remember one word I said. I just know that after that meeting, I ran to my new office, I closed the door and broke down and cried. And let me tell you, they were ugly tears. All of a sudden, there was a knock on my door. A colleague I didn't know at all came to welcome me to the school. I quickly wiped my eyes, and he said, when he opened the door, he thought something might be wrong and said, "How are you?" Of course, I lied. I said I was okay. And in now what I know to be his style, he used humor to try to comfort me, to let me know I wasn't alone, that he was here to support me any way he could, and that I had friends here at my new job. I don't remember one thing about work that day, but let me tell you, I remember my colleague's smile. I remember his caring nature. And I think it's important when I talk about trends in mental health in the workplace that we recognize the power of our coworkers and colleagues. And so my colleague taking time to show care and concern for me was exactly what I needed on one of the darkest days of my entire life. And so Dr. Bruce DeForge, he knows I'm naming him today, I thank you, and I will be forever grateful for you to come and knock on my door. Far too long, employees have been encouraged to keep their home life at home and their work life at work. Dr. Rosbeth Moss-Cantor's work in the 70s showed us that that is not the reality. And in fact, over the past several decades, employees have grown even stronger in their desire to bring their whole self to work, to be recognized for all the parts of themselves and not have to hide who they are, including sometimes their emotions and reactions to stress. But for a long time, workplace mental health focused almost solely on our ability to identify and support struggling employees and refer them for resources outside of the workplace, maybe like an EAP, employee assistance program, work life, or wellness, and encourage managers with training to document employee performance and through a performance review, be able to not only address workplace problems, but try to get the employee to reach out for help that can help them resolve things that might be going on within their personal lives. Now, let me tell you, all of these are very important today for worker mental health, but they are not enough. Counseling was extremely helpful to me during that challenging time in my life, but it wasn't enough. I spend most of my time at work. I needed to have a workplace where I felt I could positively contribute, a place that respected me, a place where I could actually feel like I could contribute as a human being. It is no longer good enough as employers to simply pull people back from the brink of collapse. We must move more upstream and do more prevention. And by doing this, we not only prevent crisis and suicidal intensity, but we also help to relieve the burden on our overworked and under-resourced mental health network and workforce. So let's fast forward a bit in mental health trends and think about the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, as well as racial injustice and social unrest happening at the same time. This changed how employers view mental health and well-being, as well as some of the programs that they offer. For decades, I feel like I've been banging my head against the wall, begging employers to invest in their employees, that this is the best investment they can make, and it would help their return on investment. But without personally experiencing mental illness, substance use, suicide, it is really hard to get CEOs and CFOs to think about how they could have a positive influence on public mental health and suicide prevention, while also, by the way, helping their bottom line. So during the pandemic, employers realized they had no choice. They had to confront head-on how to support employees and family members during this time. They saw firsthand how disinvestment in mental health and well-being ill-prepared them to deal with the crises that people were now bringing to work. The initial response during the pandemic, you might recall, was to encourage utilization of more resources, right? Counseling went online, you were able to do some of the work life and wellness programs from home, and of course, mindfulness, being centered. These individual focused interventions seem to be the answer to the problems, but many of us in this room, if not all of us, know, and research confirms, you cannot meditate your way out of a toxic work environment. And in fact, individual interventions are not always enough. So during the pandemic, I was asked to consult with a Fortune 100 international company to sit on their International Wellness Committee. At the first meeting, I was pretty upfront. Those of you that know me, I don't sugarcoat it. And I said, I'm happy to sit on this committee, but I'm not going to come here and just recommend individual behaviors to be incentivized and focus all of the onus on how individuals need to cope with their mental health and well-being. In fact, I'm going to push you to consider more systemic problems and how some of the organizational factors going on increase employee stress. I'm going to push you to take a closer look at how are you offering programs like paid leave, hazard pay, and how are you treating your Black and brown employees? For this employer, we're on the front line of the pandemic in distribution lines and didn't have the luxury to stay home and safe during the pandemic. Well, let me tell you, I was expecting to be told, thanks, Jody, but no thanks, and never hear from them again. But instead, they said, we've never had a social worker at this level of our workplace. The fact that you're pushing us on day one to look at the integration of mental health and DE&I is exactly why we need to have you here at the table. Since the onset of the pandemic, employers have invested way more into worker mental health, but they've also been forced to see firsthand the problems resulting from increased cost and lack of access to good, effective insurance-based care for their employees. Employers have pushed their partners and their vendors to be more proactive. They don't want to wait for someone to call when they're in a crisis. They want to encourage early intervention through things like universal screening, through coaching. They've been investing more in peer support and having programs internally that can provide both initial and ongoing support to employees. This, as well as the warm transfers to the mental health professionals when more assessment and support is needed. So now, as we consider where we're living in our post-pandemic lives, mental health trends in the workplace continue to push the envelope upstream. As we have moved from providing only crisis intervention and encouraging only individual behavior change, more progressive companies and workplaces have recognized the power of prevention and revising and enhancing their policies to be more fully integrated into the fabric of the work organization, as well as resourcing those programs so that they are set up for success. If we can prevent someone from experiencing a major mental health crisis and reduce suicide intensity, we have the opportunity to focus more on well-being. We have the opportunity to focus more on resilience and ongoing recovery. And guess what, guys? Research tells us that equates to better workplace outcomes as well. There's been a major shift in workplaces to train managers to be more empathic leaders that are coached on how to share their story in a way to normalize and reduce stigma about mental health help seeking. These upstream approaches are very impactful in reducing psychological harm and improving psychological safety. Policies that focus on no tolerance of harassment, bullying, racism, and discrimination in the workplace have a positive effect on the overall workplace culture, including morale and engagement. It is so important for us to help leaders to understand that they do need to be patient as they invest in culture change, because they do still often want to see immediate results from a new program or a new policy. And we know that culture change takes time. Changing that culture is an increasingly popular trend. It's one that I really hope will continue to flourish. So here at the University of Maryland, I remember our previous university president, President Perman, saying, it was, quote, there's not enough nice in the healthcare industry, and nice is what the public demands. And I thought, he would talk about being nice to each other. It was actually part of his motto and part of his vision. And when I first heard this, I kind of chuckled and thought, being nice, that seems really simple and not very impactful. And when I think back to the kind smile, the caring mannerisms of my colleague on one of the worst days of my life, I realized being nice is not only simple, it is extremely effective. So, as we come to the end of my talk, you heard a little bit about my journey and how I see some of the trends in workplace mental health. I want to give you a roadmap, steps that you can take when you leave today to start working on your own workplace. Think about, why did you stay with a certain employer? Why did you leave? As you think about your why, I want you to be able to use those examples today as you maybe take a look at the national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention. These were created by the committee that I co-chair with Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas and Chase Plank. The national guidelines are broken down into 9 practices that include downstream interventions, some that we talked about today, like crisis intervention, mitigating risk, thinking about medication and gun safety, and postvention. Moving to the middle of the screen, you can see our midstream approaches that we touched on, including things like universal screening, peer support, as well as, I can't see the third one, self-care and orientation. When we move into the upstream approaches that I really have been stressing, and I hope you're excited about them, we look at things like working on culture to create empathic leaders, communication that not only educates employees, but also works to reduce stigma, including storytelling, policy revisions, and integrating DE&I and mental health. These practices are a guide for you. They are freely available, and I hope that you will take a look to begin the process of becoming a more psychologically safe and psychologically healthy workplace. At workplacesuicideprevention.com, you can see all of this information for free and join the over 1,400 workplaces and professional organizations that have made a pledge to make suicide prevention a health and safety priority in their workplace. The best part is you can start anywhere that makes sense for your own workplace, your own department, your own organization, but start somewhere, and please take the pledge today. So myself and all of my colleagues, I want to thank you all for taking time to learn how you can help to make your work environment a place where we all can thrive, where mental health and well-being is fully supported. And I thank you for taking the time to invest in that today. Back to you, Mark and Dave. We can't hear you, Mark or Dave.
Data and trend driven, but I knew you were going to be a little bit more open today about your own experience, and I greatly appreciate hearing that story because it brings it to life. And like you said, you're a social worker, but that doesn't mean that you're immune to any of this.
That's right. That's an important thing to keep in mind, is that the people who work in the field aren't immune to the effects of mental health challenges.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that, Dr. Fry. It's been interesting for me, as Mark said, to hear not just research data coming from you, but such a personal insight into the experience that you had. And I love the fact that you touched on the idea that you won't remember the words someone says, but you'll remember how they made you feel.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Fry.
And so I've gotten the high sign from the back of the room about our video.
All right, yes.
With Judy Davidson. So why don't you cue that up?
Okay. Just in case anybody forgot, Dr. Judy Davidson is going to be talking about how we can advocate in our own communities for looking at harm reduction measures within building structures, parking garages, bridges. So let's hear from Judy now. And like I said earlier, there's a little bit of B-roll without music. Don't worry, the audio is still there. Well, hi everybody. I'm in beautiful San Diego with Judy Davidson, and Judy, this is a lovely bridge, but what are we doing here?
We're out here in front of the University of California, San Diego, where this highway overpass was just built a couple of years ago. Whoever built it was very thoughtful about suicide prevention, because you can see that the overpass has a protective barrier, a very high fence that cannot be scaled for somebody to jump over or fall from. Any bridge is a risk for suicide, and it is an evidence-based approach to build the barriers in the bridges to prevent suicide. And in addition to that, tall buildings, and especially amongst tall buildings, believe it or not, parking structures. It's estimated that out of all the people who manage parking structures, that 50% of them have had a suicide or a suicide attempt from their structure. So how do we make parking structures safer? Well, again, building them in line for suicide prevention with a barrier that's at the top is number one. In addition, tops can be put on so that you can't fall from the top to the bottom and cannot see from the top to the bottom. Then there's signage, right? Did you see signage?
I did. I saw one right over there.
There's signage here, so the signage is important too. And the way the signage is constructed is just as important as having a sign up all by itself. So a sign that says something like, "We care," "Suicide Hotline," "Get Help," 988, conveys a caring message. It might stop the person at risk of suicide just long enough for that impulsive thought or action to stop them and break the cycle, and so that the act of suicide does not occur.
And like you mentioned, slowing them down, like just even a moment for them to pause could be the difference.
This whole thing about putting up barriers to suicide is called removing access to lethal means. So if you have somebody at risk of suicide at home, and you naturally have a firearm in the house, you would want to take that firearm out of the house until that depression was under control. That's removing access to lethal means. Now, Mark, you invited me out here today, but it's taken a really big act of courage for me to stand on this bridge. A little over a year ago, my own daughter died by suicide on with an unprotected bridge. And I felt compelled to share the message about thoughtful construction ever since.
It hurts my heart when I hear you talk about that, and I'm just so thankful that you're willing to still come out here and teach and advocate, because this is public use. As a public, we need to be advocating, and your story is just so powerful, so thank you.
Yeah, so if you have an unprotected bridge in your neighborhood or community, what could you do? Well, you can advocate for retrofitting that bridge for safety with the Department of Transportation. If you know bridges are going to be built in your community, advocate that the building plans have suicide prevention. If you're a big company and they're planning on building bridges and parking garages and tall buildings, make sure the architect has thought through suicide prevention before accepting the plans.
Well, thank you, Judy. We greatly appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You know, Mark, it almost went by a little quickly, but you reacted to it, to the fact that she mentioned a daughter's suicide from a bridge.
Yeah, yeah, and we had talked about it. We wanted to make sure that we respected it, but also at the same time stayed focused on the advocacy message. So Judy, her story is so powerful. She's been in this space for 30 plus years, and to have her daughter die of suicide a little over a year ago, yet still be so focused on delivering this message today, it was inspiring. It was a great day, but a tough day as well. And we just so greatly appreciate her pushing this message forward. We would have loved to have her here today, but even the video of her is impactful. And we're actually going to hear from her a little bit later as well.
We are going to hear from her again on a different topic that's
Yeah.
also
Yes.
an important topic for her. We are a little out of order here, so bear with us slightly. She was talking about some aspects of suicide prevention that I thought were surprising. I mean, when you think about suicide prevention, who had parking garages on your bingo card?
Yeah, not many.
That caught me flat-footed. So speaking of what you think of, we're going to go to a poll again.
Yes.
So I hope I've given John enough notice to queue up the slide. Yes, here we go.
There we go.
The QR code is on the screen. This time, the question we'd like you to answer is, when you think about suicide prevention now, what is one word that comes to mind? So we're going to pause.
Live participants, QR code there. If you're on
That's right.
Zoom, simply put it in the chat.
That's right, you can do that. And while we're giving people some time to respond to that, there's a lady here in the Denver audience who's been eager to ask a question. I've seen your hand up. Would you like to go ahead and tell us now?
Thank you for allowing me to participate in your
Of course.
It's wonderful. Is the suicide hotline number 988, is it funded across the country?
Yes.
Is it funded across the country? Mark, you want to, the question is the 988 Suicide Lifeline funded across the country now? Mark, you want to take that?
And to make sure I'm understanding it, is it available throughout the country? Is that the,
No, my question is actually, is it funded? I know it's available, but the states have to fund it before
Just-
it works in that state. Colorado has funded that number for those of us who live in Colorado.
Okay, so in Colorado, the state has funded that number, and so the question is that true
Yeah.
of all states at this point?
I mean, I would love someone to hop in here and chat. I don't know. My guess was it is federally funded, but I see someone else here in the audience who's going to help us.
Yes, every state has to have crisis services.
So that is required federally to have that particular phone number.
Yes.
So can you say that again, like yelling, I guess?
Yes, I used to work in crisis services, and my understanding is that every state does have to have funding for a crisis program.
Okay.
in the state.
Okay.
Okay.
So the statement was that this speaker used to work in crisis intervention, and her understanding is that every state has to fund that now. So the 988 Lifeline, which is available by phone and by text, which we
Yes.
haven't talked about very much,
It's true.
is an important resource, and it should be available to you in the United States, wherever you're located.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's time to look at some results.
I think we should look at some results.
All
John,
right.
do we have results? This word cloud represents your responses to the question when you hear the word suicide prevention, what do you think about? I'm seeing words like connection and support.
Yep. Communication, that's another big one. Openness, empathy. These are all great.
Hope. And we're here
Hope.
for
Yep.
an afternoon of hope. So thank you for joining
There's
us
an
today.
interesting one on here, inefficient. I would love to hear more about that one because I imagine someone has some serious thoughts if that's the word they're putting forward, and
That's
everyone's thoughts
inefficient.
are necessary
that
and
is.
welcome. So that one was interesting to me. What else?
Care and support, gun safety. You're actually going to hear a little bit about that later on.
Yep.
Safety, help. Dr. Fryman, I believe, mentioned psychological safety. Someone had mentioned that recently.
Yep.
And that's important, although I don't see that exact phrase on here. So thank you for those responses. This is a way that we can encourage you to participate with us as well. Yes, you have another question?
I didn't do it fast enough, but I think asking questions.
Asking questions.
Do you have a plan?
Do you have a plan?
And I was in a position where I was afraid to do that.
You were in a position where you were afraid to do that. And that's so important, is knowing how to have the conversations, the important conversations, where when you get the sense that someone is experiencing suicidal intensity, how do you start that conversation? Mark, you would know something about that.
It's difficult because I think a lot of people are sitting there going, I don't want to say the wrong thing. What if I make them, decide to take their own life because of this conversation? And I think we can get in our head and not really be fully focused in the moment. And I think the biggest thing I teach people when we talk about this, because David and I are both certified trainers with the HOPE program that Jody Fry brought up, but one of the things I talk about is you need to breathe. Like, it sounds silly and a little basic, but when you get in these moments where you are concerned about someone's safety, it can cause us to get frantic, and we take these shallow breaths, and then we're not thinking as clearly, and we're saying the platitudes that come into our mind because we don't have clear thoughts anymore. And so being able to slow down and tell yourself, I'm here to support this person. I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but if I stay focused on the idea that I want to create a connection with you and I want to help you move to a better place, if you use that as kind of your North Star, then it's easier to stay in a conversation that people want to keep talking to you. And I guess that's the other thing I always talk to people about is do what you can to keep them wanting to talk to you. If it's not a good experience, then they're not going to want to keep talking. And so sometimes the conversation might go differently than you had planned or expected it. But if you keep them wanting to talk to you, you always have a chance to redirect. So those are my kind of off-the-cuff thoughts.
Keep them wanting to talk to you. That was so well put. Thank you for that, Mark.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Off-the-cuff discourse that has added so much, I believe, to our content this afternoon. You know, as we think about where we're going next, we will be going back to New York for another speaker there. And there's a contact point here that I think is worth mentioning. Mark, you have mentioned that major support for this event comes from CCA, which is the company that you work for, and it's also the employer of our next speaker.
Yes.
You want to say a word or two about that?
Absolutely. So thank you. Corporate Counseling Associates, like I mentioned, we had this idea when David came and said, hey, Mark, I'm thinking about doing this on World Suicide Prevention Day, and I took it to my leaders, and they immediately were like, yes, go do it, whatever you need. It really was inspiring because, to be honest, I'm actually pretty new at CCA, and I didn't know what they were going to say, but they really said, go do it, whatever you need, you have it, and it was just so inspiring to me, and one of those confirmations that I had gotten to a place that really cared about these topics.
Well, and you mentioned my name, and that probably made all
Yeah,
the
absolutely. David Odie's going to be part of it, and they were like, done.
I told you I wasn't going to take myself too seriously, didn't I?
But one of the things that Corporate Counseling Associates does is I like to describe them as workplace mental health change agents. They have products and services that we implement with organizations, helping them look at the whole continuum of mental health. It's not just mental illness and people in distress. It's that well-being side of the mental health continuum as well. And so they sell employee assistance program products as well as learning and development, like Jody said, helping leaders create that culture. And like David mentioned, our next speaker is a colleague of mine. His name is Dr. Jay Sandys. He's a licensed clinical social worker. And he's going to be talking to us about a healthy workplace culture and how that supports both business performance and employee well-being. Anything you want to say about it?
Yes, I'll say good afternoon, Jay Sandys. How are you?
Very well. Good afternoon.
So Jay is here to tell us how workplaces can do more to support their employees. He's a mental health professional with 29 years of clinical experience and 17 years consulting specifically on the workplace and its role in employee mental health. So please welcome, joining us from New York City, Dr. Jay Sandys.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mark and David. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm going to talk to you today about the workplace culture specifically and how to make it support mental health and well-being. Excuse me. There's a little bit of overlap with Dr. Fry, but I think that's a good thing because we're very much in agreement and we're both social workers who have a lot of experience with employee assistance programs. So I want to start out and just talk a little bit about why this topic's important, define organizational culture and psychological safety, something that was mentioned already, talk a little bit about some of the barriers people face in terms of getting help, and then dive into how to create a more supportive culture within the workplace. So why is this topic important? As was already said, it's not only good for the individual, but it's also good for the organization. And as far as I'm concerned, the workplace plays a really integral role in our lives. Most people who have mental health issues are employed, and the workplace presents an opportunity to see if somebody is struggling and to offer some intervention and have some resources in order to address that. So to me, there's just it's a critical function of the workplace to improve employee well-being, which also, as it happens, helps improve the bottom line. So they really go well together. I've always believed that. I got into EAP work almost 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago, and it's always been my view that productivity, profit, and so on, business reasons and humanistic reasons really come together. And it's what I love so much about the employee assistance world. So when we're at the workplace, one of the things we have the opportunity to do, even when people are working remotely, and we saw this during COVID, that we had to pay a little bit different attention to their performance or how we measure their performance and so on. But if we're looking at how they perform, their behavior and their appearance, and if there's any changes in those, then we can identify that there might be a problem and we could be a little bit more proactive. Now, what happens if we don't deal with those things? Some of the problems are anything from absenteeism, productivity issues, turnover, conflict, safety issues, and healthcare expenditures also can be really increased. So workplace mental health issues cost companies billions of dollars in this country every year, in lost productivity, but also in increased healthcare expenditures. So addressing something proactively, dealing with it sooner than later is really something that we're striving for. And as Dr. Fry mentioned, EAPs historically were really reactive. And the thought here is we're always trying to be a little bit more proactive. And some of the things that I've been working on and that others have also been addressing is to address the culture of the organization overall and thus improve the well-being and to prevent suicide risk and to prevent or decrease mental health issues. So we're talking about culture. What are we really talking about? It's the consistent, observable patterns of behavior within an organization. It's how things get done. And it has a big impact in terms of how employees are treated, what resources are offered, how safe employees feel asking for help. And this is another term that came up before, which is psychological safety. When we say psychological safety, what we're talking about is people feeling safe enough to take interpersonal risks, to ask questions, to voice disagreement, to share personal information, to share when they're struggling, to share innovative, perhaps unpopular ideas without the fear of reprisal or repercussions. And this is something that can be established within an organization. In fact, you can have psychological safety also within a team. And it really is good for business, because if somebody has an issue with how things are done or at the status quo, or they see a problem and they feel okay about voicing it, or they have a new idea or a different way of doing things, you can see how beneficial that can be to the organization so that it can be adaptive. But also, psychological safety allows people to speak up and to not fear being judged so much and not fear some repercussion or losing their job or something like that. So it's really an important part of my message here that increasing psychological safety is part of something we want to embed within the culture of the organization, and we all have a part in that. We can all advocate for that. So what are some of the barriers? Some of the stuff that was mentioned already, the biggest one being stigma. Now, this is something that occurs across the country, around the world even. Mental health issues, substance abuse issues are stigmatized. People are treated badly, are thought to be weak or have a moral failing or something like that. Physical illness is treated much differently. So this is a big barrier to why a lot of people don't want to share, and why it was so brave of everybody here to be able to share some of their struggles. Some of the other stuff is just lack of awareness. Even though we've been doing this for so long, I've been at so many companies, I still run into people who don't know what an EAP is or don't know how to access resources and so on. And to me, that kind of message, it really never stops. There's also, of course, an issue around inadequate resources, and that's maybe a bigger problem than most organizations can deal with. So one thing I think is really critical is normalizing help-seeking behavior. And one of the ways we do it, and we've seen it here today, is by leaders sharing their own struggles. So if a leader shares their struggle, it sets the tone here that it's okay to share, that they're not being harshly judged, that there are no repercussions. It's showing that there's some level of psychological safety. But leaders, if they don't want to share their personal information, can also ask people how they're doing. They can share information about mental health. They can prioritize mental health. And to me, that's the biggest thing a company can do. There's lots of specifics, and I'll get into a few of those, but prioritizing mental health and well-being of the workforce for humanistic and business reasons is the main message here. If they do that, they're going to put resources towards it. They're going to start changing the culture of the organization. and they can really make a big impact there. Another thing that I think is critical is gathering data. So knowing what your employees are looking for. So you could do surveys, you could do focus groups, you could do different ways of gathering information. You can also do data analysis of some of the healthcare expenditures and target interventions based on what issues people are experiencing, what things they're asking for, what areas of parts of the organization that are struggling more than others, and being able to target interventions specifically for those needs can really make a big difference. Another thing that I think is really critical is partnering with your EAP. So this is totally my focus because I work at an EAP and we also do consulting, but I've seen so often that people will have, an organization will have an EAP that's just check the box. They have it, it's separate, they don't want to have anything to do with it. And what I'm saying is partnering with the EAP, speaking with the account executives, bringing them in, really sharing some of the struggles and things they're dealing with makes a huge difference. Promotion of EAP services is ongoing. It never ends. And bringing the EAP in to discuss some of the crises and some of the problems can really be helpful, that together you have a partner that can work with you to come up with solutions. Another thing that I think is critical and that's been mentioned already is building community. There's a number of ways to do that, but community is something that is so important for all of our well-being. So building a community within the organization could look like creating an employee resource group around mental health, or as been mentioned before, around DEI, or any other number of areas and specific groups, but empowering people within the organization to advocate for themselves and to ask for policy change or additional services or anything like that can really make a big difference. Also peer programs. I've run a few of those myself and created those, and they're really helpful because they help to bring people together around a common cause and have people trained and aware of what mental health issues are, how to identify risk, what to do, what resources are available, how to have conversations. And to me, it makes a huge difference, not just in terms of what they can do directly one-to-one, but overall in the culture of the organization. So we've trained a lot of people around becoming a peer and how to support others. But to me, the real difference is I think the people who are peers themselves benefit. And I think they go out into the organization and start changing the culture to make it a little bit more supportive. Another thing that I'm a big believer in is training managers. This has been around forever. People have been doing it for a long time, but I think it's just a critical thing that I wanted to point out. Training a manager about how to have a difficult conversation, how to pay attention to performance, some of the things that a manager does, but sometimes they don't do it well. Sometimes they're not meeting regularly with their employees, or they don't know what to do or what to say. So providing some training so people can feel a little bit more comfortable addressing a difficult topic and say, hey, I've noticed you're coming to work late, you're not getting things done on time, there's some performance concern. What's going on? How do I help you? How do I stay present? How do I stay engaged with you? How do I show empathy without judgment? And this is something that's learned. And we want to empower managers at the front line and leaders at all levels to be able to champion this kind of thing and really promote mental well-being, to know what to do in an emergency if somebody's at risk and acutely at risk, but also to get something earlier and be more proactive. Another thing that I didn't mention is setting boundaries. And to me, the overall workplace culture, because it's so critical in terms of how supported people are, if there's boundaries set, and it's something we saw really during COVID, is there a difference between work and not working? There really wasn't during COVID, right? It's really something we saw. Are people called after hours or when they're on vacation? Are people expected to be on call 365, every day of the year? Or is there some policy or cultural support for separation of work and life? And I think that's a critical thing to remember. So I just want to say a healthy workplace is a safe and productive workplace. And so I think that those both come together. I'm a big believer in it. And thanks for letting me speak today. Back to you, David, Mark.
Thank you, Jay.
Dr. Sandys.
Go ahead. I said Jay, you said Dr. Sandys. You're much more formal.
Well, you know him better than I do. We have a question for you, Jay. This came in anonymously from one of our audience members, and it seems to be something that you've touched on. It's closely related to what you were just talking about, but I'll go ahead and put this question to you. What are some of the signs that someone is severely depressed if you don't know them well or haven't spent a lot of time with them?
Well, so one of the things we tell people to look for is a change in behavior, but of course, you don't know them well, you might not know that. So if they're isolating, if they're quiet, if they're crying a lot or seem super reactive, there's if they make a statement that they want to hurt themselves, if there's a performance concern. But the main thing is you really don't know. Like if somebody is very quiet or isolated, maybe that's just their personality and they've always been like that. So really what I would say is find out more. If you're worried and you're seeing some signs that someone seems sad, tearful, is mopey, has no energy, is isolating, is unfocused, or any other concern like that, especially if they make a statement saying, I wish I wasn't here, or anything like that, then it's definitely of concern. But having a conversation with them, if you have a thought they're depressed, and find out what they say. How are you doing? Can I help you? Let them share.
Okay. So it's the importance of getting to know people. If you're a manager, getting to know your people at a very personal level so you can detect those changes.
Yeah, and I think Jay said it well in terms of he didn't use these words, but follow your intuition at times. I would be kicking myself if I didn't ask you. I know I don't know you well, but I'm a little concerned. But that baseline is important, because even as a clinician, if I don't know the person, I don't know when they've changed, but you as employees and coworkers, you know when that behavior has changed. And so it's paying attention and it's getting to know people.
So thank you for talking about the workplace culture, Jay. That's so important.
It is.
Thank you.
So another piece when it comes to the workplace are our employer benefits, the benefits we get from our employers. And most of us don't take full advantage of these benefits, which is unfortunate because there are so many in there that support our mental health. And as a licensed clinician and vice president of health transformations at Aon, Alicia England is going to walk us through how we can maximize those benefits. She knows a thing or two about this, and so she's going to help us understand how we can get the most out of our company benefits when it comes to supporting our mental health. Please welcome, joining us live from Minneapolis, Alicia England. Good afternoon, Alicia.
Good afternoon, Mark and David. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Take it away.
Awesome. So today has been a great dialogue, and I want to add to that, to the point that Mark introduced with benefits. One thing to consider, and what Aon's human capital leader has recently said, is that 83% of employees who are asked about their employer's responsibility for health and benefits or not, they said yes. 83% of employees say their employer has some responsibility for their health and well-being. That's up 3 points from year over year. That's staggering. That goes to say that the things that we're talking about today within the workplace are so critical, and that people are looking for that. Maybe in the past where they would have had or sought different independence, they're seeing the workforce as both impacting and ability to bring forth differences for them. So when we talk about benefits, first of all, I want to level set a couple things. One is mental health is health, so it's for everybody. And I think that's so key to know, because when I'm going to talk about a few things, I want to talk about the benefit landscape from prevention through treatment. So let's maintain people's health. That's great. Let's look at how do we help people achieve better health, and how do we help them sustain that. So that's a continuum across the board. And I think it's something that is really key, because many times people come to me and say, we have this crisis or we have this situation. Definitely will help you. And then how can we start to see that before that was coming? Sometimes you can't, sometimes you can. But as we've talked about here today, many of us have been directly impacted indirectly. And let's be honest, life changes very quickly, that you could be the person that needs this So from a benefit standpoint, and you think about employers and you think about being a colleague in the workplace, a couple things to make note of that people have talked about today. When people ask to talk to you, they ask for your time, they ask for your attention, give it to them. And a couple things I'll say about that. So from a benefits perspective, I worked for a national carrier before I had an opportunity here to come at Aon. And what I'll tell you, and many people don't know this, is that your carriers, many of them have 24/7 crisis lines, ways to help people. And I was always surprised when I worked at that national carrier, how many times people go to the back of their card to actually get help. So as an employer, as an employee, think about how you can assure that there's going to be a front door for people through the benefit plan 24/7 through that health plan. The other thing I'll say too is that what I love that the carrier space is doing right now is they're looking at social determinants of health. Mark opened us up earlier talking about hope. This is a day of hope. When people aren't getting their food needs met, their employment needs met, their children's needs met, that reduces hope, that increases risk. And so making sure that when we're looking at total benefits, that we're looking at social determinants of health, because you can give people the best benefits, but if they have nowhere to get there, they can't pay for it, that's not going to be as helpful. With employee assistance program, they are phenomenal doors for people to go to. When we think about stigma, sometimes it's easier for people to go to EAP, sometimes not, versus their behavioral health plan. But you got to assure that your EAP has a means that if a crisis comes up, that people can be handed off or integrated into the system that will help them. The other piece that I want to mention too, when we think about benefits, it's so key that if you provide a benefit to an employee for musculoskeletal pain, making sure that that provider, that vendor has a process for if somebody says it's too much. Because we know when you have back pain, you are more at risk for depression, you're more at risk for depression, you're more at risk for suicidal ideation. The other piece from a benefit perspective is that when you have a tragedy in the workplace, someone has death by suicide, there's a shooting, making sure that those services for critical incident stress debriefing and disruptive event management are brought in, because if we don't help people, there's a risk for something more to happen. And that can be a very, very good way to help people. The last thing I'll say is around culture. So many of my colleagues and now new friends have talked about this. Culture is the glue that brings us together or it keeps us apart. And so helping your leaders be empathetic, helpful, resourceful, because those benefits can be there, but if there's no one there to help them get there, that won't help very much. Reducing stigma. And then also, as you're looking at your benefits, and I talk to many people about benefits and spending money on benefits and how are they going to go for this next option. If it's in a business imperative, it's helpful. Your talent are the most important people and their families. Taking care of them and doing that from a business point of view is smart, and it's the right thing to do for people. So those are a few things that were top of mind for me today. So Mark and David, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Elisha. That was fantastic. Let's give her a round of applause, everybody. And Elisha and I are a little bit in the same space in terms of I sell EAP products and work with companies a lot of times, helping them determine what's needed. And Elisha brought up social determinants of health, and that's something that I don't think it's recognized enough, because right now, year over year, most people report financial concerns being their biggest stressor. And last year, about this time, the American people went over $3 trillion in credit card debt. And so people are spending more and saving less, and it is causing financial concerns that have a ripple effect. And so being able to, from a company perspective, look at a whole person and everything they need is important, even if it might not be mental health services. It might be needing to consult on their budget so they can make ends meet. But looking at that whole person is crucial.
That whole person, it sure is. I want to ask you to do one thing for me, Mark. I'm not sure, have we ever actually defined the term EAP?
Oh, wow. We're just chatting about it like everyone's insiders here. So EAP stands for Employee Assistance Programs. And what they're mostly known for are the free counseling sessions. So almost every employer has them nowadays. And it is typically available not only to employees, but to members of their household as well. So keep that in mind. One of the best ways you can be there for somebody that you care about is being able to right then in the moment say, hey, we have this EAP available. I think it can help. Here's the phone number, whether it's in your phone or if you have a business card or whatever, but being able to point them that direction right then in the moment is crucial.
So thank you for that, Elisha. And Mark, I'm just going to let you go ahead and take it from there.
Yeah, okay.
And bring in our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the ironies of working in the mental health and suicide prevention space is that we often need to reach people who are in roles that carry high stress, high risk, yet who, by the very nature of their jobs, may be extremely reluctant to seek professional help. So think about law enforcement, pilots, medical doctors, nurses, military personnel, those holding security clearances. All these individuals are concerned that something might happen to their livelihood, yet they recognize that they need support. So these people may have a justifiable fear that any open discussion about their mental health could put their livelihood at risk. And that fear, of course, simply adds to their stress. So how do you reach those groups?
Fortunately, our next speaker is well qualified to address that very question. We go to Fort Worth, Texas now to hear from Dr. Charles B. Williams. Good afternoon, Dr. Williams.
Good afternoon, David. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Charles, how are you? Sorry, a
Doing
little more
well, thank you.
informal again.
Dr. Williams is a board-certified emergency physician as well as a licensed police officer in the state of Texas with over 20 years' experience in trauma in all its forms. He has subject matter expertise in critical care, civilian and military special operations, and terrorism mitigation. He is currently the Chief Medical Officer of Lockheed Martin Corporation, where he has global oversight over on-site medical operations and crisis management. He is joining us from his home in Fort Worth, Texas. Please welcome Dr. Charles B. Williams.
Thanks so much, David. And Mark, thanks again for the invitation to participate in this. I can't tell you how professionally and personally pivotal this is. It truly is an honor to be here today and to hear such a great panel of folks talking about things that really can be significantly impactful to many people's lives. As we talked about, and as you mentioned, one of the populations that really I've lived and breathed with for decades and continue to do so in my current role are people that really work in high stress environments and high risk environments, and people that hold security clearance classification to do some very important things for national and international and global security. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit today was who are those people and how do you reach those people? Because the nature of the business and the work that they do really does drive a tremendous amount of stress in their life, as well as a lot of trauma and a lot of drama that really trickles down into things that they need to be able to speak about and do that openly, but there's an incredible stigma that exists. So I wanted to start with thinking about who are those people that do that. If you think about who are the roles, who are the individuals that choose the role to work in a high risk, a high stress environment, sometimes making life or death decisions in a matter of moments. You think of those people that really have a strong sense of purpose. Those have a tremendous feeling of purpose to the cause that they're serving. Those are individuals that have typically incredible responsibilities most of the time that touch not only their life, but multiple lives as well. Those are individuals that work under the expectation, both internally and self-imposed expectations, that they have to have the ability to perform those tasks and functions without implicit institutional bias and without really the emotions that normally drive our everyday decisions in a very logical and realistic format. And those individuals are making decisions in many instances that are, again, life and death, or have implications to the lifestyle and manner of multiple others. In order to do that and to meet the expectations that are both internal and external, many times people build these barriers or firewalls between their emotions, their personalities, and the work that they have to do. That firewall, as you mentioned, Mark, is ironic that that firewall, in order for them to affect their job and do it with precision, is actually one of the things that helps enable the stigma that if I talk about the challenges, the concerns that I'm having, the worries that I have, and the emotional challenges that I face as an individual, that the fear is that that's going to put our job and our ability to do the role that we committed to do effectively. I know this because, again, I'm an emergency medicine physician and law enforcement officer, and for over 2 decades, professionally, I've had the opportunity to witness and care for people that have attempted suicide countless times, and unfortunately, I've had the chance to see people that were successful in their suicidal attempts more times than I want to know. As a family member, as a father, my family and I continue to struggle on a daily basis with the tragedy of losing my youngest daughter, who is a beautiful 16-year-old girl, 8 years ago this month to suicide. So personally and professionally, and as a chief medical officer for a major organization in the defense industry, I too have to walk the walk that we're talking about. So I thought that it would be interesting and hopefully helpful to the group to talk about how do you reach that group? How do you get them to talk? How do you help them understand that it's important that they too, despite having to be Superman or woman in some instance, they too should have an opportunity to talk about their kryptonite or the challenges that they have. The great news is many of the things that we've heard already from the presenters are all elements of what you need. I think, and I took notes because it was all fantastic, and I always translate that information over. The work that Dr. Frey and Dr. England were talking about, as far as and Dr. Sandy were talking about putting together a healthy work environment and a workplace and a culture in which it is okay to talk about those things are so important. Working with special operations teams, small teams, and so forth, the thing that they truly, that makes them successful is knowing about each other, not only their strengths, but their vulnerabilities. And so there's a few things that came to mind that I thought about. What are the things that really are important for this community of the employees that work in high-risk environments and those people that hold security clearance classification? We'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. And it really is much the same as what you do for any employee or any other person that's out there that you get an indication that there's a challenge. The first thing I talk about is active listening. And I think it was Dr. Sandy that was just talking about that. What is active listening? And that is really looking for changes in behavior. When I talk to my teams about how do they connect with their employees on their emotional well-being, I tell them to listen and to do that actively. And that's not just with your ears, but with your eyes, looking at behaviors, changes in habits, whether they're disheveled, whereas they're normally, very well kept, whether or not they're showing up to meetings, whether or not they are late or prompt or they're prepared, so forth. So looking for those things, not just listening for the words they're saying, but I also tell my team to listen with your heart. So I think it was, I think, Mark, you were actually talking about your first interface with a person who was had suicidal ideation, that was having challenges, and that you noticed that something was off. There wasn't anything specific that you saw, you just felt that something was off. What I tell people is to listen with your heart, because we do instinctually, if we're truly listening and we're actively listening, we have the ability in many instances to make a determination when something just isn't right. And you should have that ability and know what to do to act on that. So active listening is one of the things that I talk about. The other thing that's important for special operations teams, high-risk employees, they're working in high-risk employees, people with security clearances is another thing we talked about. And that's, I think John talked about that. as he was talking about the work that he was doing in the Army, in the military, and that is understanding that you're not alone. So normalization versus minimization. In other words, letting other people know that what they are experiencing is understood and that many people do that. Now, it's not saying everyone thinks that way, so just disregard it. That's minimization. Normalization is saying, listen, we understand this is an issue. How do we work through this issue? And by the way, a lot of people have this issue as well. So for people that are the elite, we call that in my genre, we call that the tip of the spear. So those people that are the tip of the spear are afraid of no longer being the tip. You need to help those people understand that everyone has emotional issues at some point in time in their life, and they should be prepared and know how to work through those things. So normalization, so active listening, normalization. Vulnerability. One of the ways that I connect with my teams and the people that I work with is letting them know that I too am a person. And just as we've talked about earlier, I too and my family have had their struggles with people with emotional health and well-being and have had tragic consequences. So people knowing that tends to open up that aperture of exactly what we're talking about, and that is building this circle of trust. The fact that they trust you enough to work with them to help them work through this issue, and it doesn't denigrate, one, the professionalism of the role that they do and the tasks that they have at hand. So incredibly important to bring an element of vulnerability into that and engender trust as well. And so along the line of trust, I want to quickly talk about security clearances. The federal government recognized years ago that the standard that they had for what qualified for losing your security clearance was much too rigid and much too tight. And so there was a very intentional element throughout our federal government to rewrite the language around what qualifies for reporting needs for security clearance and what is a disqualifier and what is not. And the good news is that whereas there are still things such as involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility or imminent risk to yourself or others, things that make sense that truly do run an individual the risk of not getting a security clearance or keeping a security clearance, many of the things like seeking counseling, expressing concerns of anxiety, reporting those types of conditions, being on medications for depression and that being well managed, many of those things have no implication on your security clearance whatsoever. Depending on who you work for and the customer, you may or may not have to report it, but it absolutely it no longer means you're not going to get or you're not going to maintain a security clearance. And that was all really and very intentional effort by the federal government to build this element of trust and help the people understand that you truly should be seeking care for these issues that are concerning you, rather than sequestering them, pushing them away, and not speaking about them for risk of losing your security clearance. That all is an element of trust. And I think the final thing that I wanted to talk about that's important is this issue of inspiring hope. Now, what is hope? Hope can be defined many different ways, but for me, hope is instilling in someone that vision that there is something beyond the dark days that they're seeing, that there are resources, that there are opportunities, and that all ties to the work that employers are doing in their employee assistance programs, their EAP programs, to help get their employees connected to the resources. But even if you're working with someone, or even if you are that someone that struggles with purpose and why is this happening, you should always work to understand, one, there's always hope, or you should always be working to help give people hope, because as long as people have hope, they don't get desperate. Without hope, you become desperate. And we all know the challenges and complications that come when people are desperate. So I think that the incredible work that's being done here helping to bring this information forward, and the work that all of the presenters are doing to continue to spread the message and help decrease the stigma. And most importantly, all the people that are here attending and watching is incredibly important to help understand how do you help others and how do you help yourself. With that, I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions at the end. I'll give that back to you, Mark and David. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you,
Dr. Williams.
Williams.
First, let me say, Dr. Williams, thank you for sharing such a personal story. It helps everyone understand that no one is immune to this, no matter what profession you choose or vocation you choose.
That's right. That's right. And apparently my microphone is working again. So isn't it amazing what technology can do? I do have a question here, and I wonder well, I will let Dr. Williams and Mark decide about tag teaming on this question. I think we can get perspectives from both of you. But let's start with Dr. Williams. An audience member named Jane Gehring asks, are there specific skills or training that can be helpful to managers in developing a safe workplace culture?
Mark, I'll let you go first, and then I'll chime in as well.
Thank you. Well, to be honest, I'm going to reiterate a lot of what Dr. Williams just said about active listening and connection and being able to ask those difficult questions. And active listening truly is not just listening for what you're going to say next or in your head formulating that next response. It's truly sitting there and absorbing everything they're telling you, even if you have to pause afterwards and say, wow, that is a lot. I'm not even sure what to say. I want to support you. I don't want to say the first thing that comes to mind. I want to say the right thing. And so I'm just going to sit here and absorb everything you're telling me, or however you want to say it. That you don't need to respond immediately to something so impactful, but you could miss a lot if that's all you're thinking about is, how am I going to respond to them? So that's just one specific skill. The question was also about resources. I'll tell you about two real quickly. One, there's a training out there called Mental Health First Aid.
Yes.
It's for organizations. It's extensive, but it's extremely helpful understanding what people might be going through, how to look for those different signs and symptoms, how to approach them. It's very skill-based training. There's another one called the HOPE certification program, which David and I are a part of. It stands for Helping Our People Elevate, which is more of a large-scale workplace training that helps people within their organization craft mentally healthy workplaces through their messaging, through their benefits, through leadership involvement. And so those are just two to go check out when it comes to resources. But Dr. Williams, what else would you add to that?
Well, I would say, Mark, I think one, your references are absolutely right. What I would encourage is that for any of you that are employees of an organization of any size, unless it's you working out of your home, reach out to your HR professional or reach out to your EAP organization and say, what training do we have available? Invariably across the board, every organization that I've spoken with that has a dedicated EAP resource has within that EAP resource training available, oftentimes at no cost to the company or the employee, on how do you make your managers more attuned to having conversations with your employees about their emotional well-being and health. And our EAP organization does that, and then I do that independently within our organization as well. So absolutely, please do reach out to your EAP organization if your company has one, to understand what they offer across all the bandwidth, because I'll guarantee you in most instances, it's more comprehensive than what you understand. I will say this, the number one thing to do is build the awareness. The mental health first aid program, any other, emotional well-being program, my goal and hope is that it builds an awareness that managers can absolutely have a conversation with their employees that says, how are you doing? And is there something that I can do to help? You're not asking for someone to disclose any protected personal health information. You're not requiring that or mandating, but it builds that element of trust. It shows that you care. It gives you the opportunity to listen and hear, both with your eyes, your ears, and your heart, right? And it helps you better understand what are the things that you can do to help your employees be more successful, productive, and satisfied with work, which is what we all as managers want.
Thank you. Very
Absolutely.
well put, Dr. Williams.
Yes, it was.
Are you ready for a break?
I'm ready for a break.
Are you ready for a break?
We've been doing this for a while now, so
Yes.
we are going to take 10-minute break.
10-minute break.
10-minute break,
Don't
sorry.
oversell it.
Yes, before our next speaker. But while we're doing that, we have another chance to interact together. So we're going to put a question up on the screen. You can either use the QR code again or answer directly in chat. But the question is, what is one takeaway so far from an afternoon of hope? So we have 10 minutes. Please be back in your seats so we can look at Dr. Jody Jacobson's second video. Thank you, everybody.
Dr. Judy Davidson. I think
Judy Davidson. Wow, I
Yes.
am all over the place.
You're mixing up some
I really
names
am.
there.
Yeah.
We
Dr.
do need a
Judy
break.
Davidson, yes.
10 minutes.
Thank you for joining us for an afternoon of hope. We'll be back in just a few moments. You could scan the QR code and answer the question, what's your one takeaway from an afternoon of hope?
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that 10-minute break. While we were gone, people were putting in the results of the Stream Alive question we asked. Let's take a look at those questions here, or those answers. So what's one takeaway from an afternoon of hope? Engage in caring conversations with the one who is in need. By doing so, you show them they're valued. I love this one. Can't meditate your way out of a toxic workplace. That's so true. I think Dr. Fry had that line, and it was just excellent. So to move us along for today, I want to focus specifically on a population that does a great job of supporting other people, but don't do a great job of taking care of themselves. And I'm talking about healthcare professionals, nurses specifically. And since nurses make up 13% of the American workforce, which I had no idea, nurses make up 13% of the American workforce, we thought we should spend a few minutes talking specifically to them. So let's watch the second part of my interview with Dr. Judy Davidson. I think a lot of people are surprised when we talk about nurses and healthcare professionals not accessing care. I think a lot of people sit there going, well, these are the ones who understand the importance of it, yet it's really difficult to get them to engage. Why would you say that is?
When anything is this problematic, it's usually multifactorial. But one of the big issues we're addressing right now is the questions that we have to ask as licensed healthcare professionals to get our licenses, to get credentialed in a healthcare system, and then the questions that are asked upon hiring. The questions on licensure, the questions on hiring, the questions on credentialing, they were all designed with good intentions to protect the public. But we now know that those intrusive questions about your past mental health history or the medications that you're taking, they violate the American Disabilities Act, and they also are associated with suicide. The good news is there's advocacy being done right now to change all of this from the past. You can download a QR code from the Lorna Breen Foundation website. The Lorna Breen Foundation has been set up to address these issues of stigma against mental health seeking behaviors. And they developed a great toolkit for you to assess your licensing, credentialing, or hiring questions to see if they comply with the ADA.
And the other good thing is that people at an Afternoon of Hope, you can go to our resources page, and there you can find the toolkit as well. I hear that UC San Diego has one of the best programs in the nation when it comes to supporting workers in suicide prevention.
Mark, thank you so much for asking me about that. We're really proud of this program. It's called the Healer Education Assessment and Referral Program, HEAR, the HEAR program. And the way it works is we partner with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. They developed a screening tool that covers many different forms of mental health problems. Depression, anxiety, sleep disorders, substance use disorders, you name it, it's in there. And we send a message to every employee at least once a year, asking them to proactively take care of their own mental health by doing the screening to see if maybe they would benefit from treatment. All you need to do is contact the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, ask them about the interactive screening program, and you can set up a process to deploy this in your company to safely screen staff for mental health issues.
I mean, that is so key, making people feel comfortable that it's confidential. Because if anyone has any concern about it being found out, their job being at stake, anything like that, it's going to cause them not to participate. So, Judy, thank you so much for your time today. We are going to miss you on September 10th, but we greatly appreciate you being here and being part of this event.
Well, hey, Mark, before we leave, you want to take a walk on our special art path, and we're going to go see the house. Oh, yes. We're going to go see the fallen star, and I'm going to give the audience one more tip about suicide prevention.
That sounds awesome. Let's do it. So, Judy, this is a pretty impressive snake. Where are we? What are we doing?
Well, the snake is part of our special Stewart collection. It's a collection of outdoor art. But what I really wanted you to see is that house off to the distance. So that house was designed by an artist who came to the United States and then felt so unsettled after moving away from his hometown, isolated, alone, disconnected, right, and a little off kilter. Everything felt just not quite right, like falling off the edge of a cliff. And that's what that house represents. Well, in America today, we have an epidemic of loneliness, and loneliness is one of the risk factors for suicide. So each of us has the opportunity to break through that. We can change. We can get rid of the epidemic of loneliness by taking action both at work and at home. So at work, do you meet the new people on your team? Reach out to them and invite them for coffee, invite them for lunch, make sure that they're socially enculturated into your workforce. Does the organization itself have ways to keep people connected? Then at home, do you meet your new neighbors down the hall or in the next house? So each of us has an individual opportunity to bust that epidemic of loneliness and that risk factor for suicide.
That was a pretty powerful day, spending it with Judy Davidson and hearing her story and how much she wants to teach. And the last lesson she gave us around loneliness is so timely. It is an epidemic that has been going on for years, way before the pandemic was ever around. And there are things we can do to address it. So I loved the note she ended on. The fallen star, that art piece is just incredible. So all around, it was a great day. She also mentioned something that I want to point out. She talked about 2 resources that you can access. And then you saw me in the video say, the good news is you can go to our resources page. So it's afternoonofhope.com. And if you go there, you'll see the resources tab. You click that. The resources that have been discussed today are there, but there's also original content. For example, Sally Spencer Thomas is an international expert on suicide prevention who couldn't be here today, but she recorded a video for us specifically for an Afternoon of Hope, focused on helping working parents who might be concerned about their children and possibly having suicidal thoughts and ideation, and how do you support them? So please check out that resources page. It has a lot of great information and education on there, which we've received a lot of so far today. I don't know about you, but it has been a pretty amazing day with everything that our experts have given us. And today is an afternoon of hope. And so we want to shift gears a little bit. You've already met my co-host, David Odie. What you may not realize is that he has a very personal connection with today's topic. As you are about to find out, when you hear what he has to say, you will understand even more clearly why we call this event an Afternoon of Hope. David's speech is titled 6 Words. Please welcome back to the stage my co-host and our keynote speaker, David Odie. Thank you, David.
You've heard this afternoon from mental health professionals, from other medical professionals, from researchers. I am none of those things. I am a storyteller. Now, you've heard some powerful stories this afternoon. You've heard stories of loss. You've heard stories of hope. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. Even some of our mental health professionals have shared with us some of their own challenges. What you're about to hear from me is what those mental health professionals call lived experience. Now, you may not know this, but the phrase lived experience comes from a Latin phrase meaning he did not go to med school. That's right, no med school debt for me. But my therapist just bought a house in Aspen. Now, when I talk about my lived experience, that's not in any way meant to imply any comparison with your own experience, or that anything that worked for me will work for you. It's just my experience. What I do believe is that when you have experienced what you're about to hear, something will be different for you. Maybe you'll feel compelled to have that challenging conversation with someone you've been putting off, somebody close to you. Maybe you will be ready to have a conversation with a mental health professional. I hope you will feel emboldened to share your story with someone who needs to hear it. And maybe you will think, wow, I'm not alone. And that would be good too. So come with me on a little journey through time. Oh, if you are prone to claustrophobia, please ignore me for the next 3 minutes. Seriously, take out your phone, 2 games of Candy Crush, you should be good. Otherwise, imagine this. You are walking into a tunnel. Not a highway tunnel, not a carpal tunnel, not a tunnel that Wile E. Coyote painted on the side of a cliff, but a tunnel leading into an abandoned gold mine. As you move away from the entrance, the only light comes from a headlamp being worn by the person walking in front of you, because there's no room for the two of you to walk side by side. You can reach both hands out and touch the sides of this tunnel. If that feels like it's closing in, get your phone out. Candy Crush, I'm telling you. We'll pick you up later. You can smell the musty, damp air in this tunnel that's carved out of solid rock. But the only thing you can see is the outline of the person walking in front of you, silhouetted against the light of his headlamp reflecting off the tunnel walls. That's where I was. I was 12 years old. And the person walking in front of me was my dad. We were vacationing in northern New Mexico, and my dad had taken it upon himself to decide that it would be a good idea to explore one of the abandoned gold mines that dot the side of Wheeler Peak. And you might be wondering, well, David, why on earth would you follow him in there? When I was 12 years old, I would follow my dad a lot of places. He was the kind of guy who would walk into an abandoned gold mine, confident in the knowledge that the worst that would happen is he'd walk out with a new story. So yeah, I was following him. And then, all of a sudden, without any warning, I found myself in pitch darkness. No light at all, no familiar outline of my father's shape. When I reached out to touch him, he wasn't there. Where had he gone? Had he fallen down some hidden shaft? If I took one more step, would I do the same? I froze. I felt my heart pounding, my mouth going too dry to speak. I said to myself, David, there's no one here to help you. What are you going to do? I was paralyzed. And then, just as suddenly, I was blinded by the light. You just sang that in your head, didn't you? You can thank me for the earworm later. It'll be in your mind all week. I was blinded by the light of my father's headlamp. He had turned around to see why I wasn't following him. The tunnel had unexpectedly made a sharp right turn, and when he turned, there was nothing to reflect his light back at me. To this day, I have never experienced such utter physical darkness. My dad looked at me and said, "Why weren't you following me?" And I said, "You disappeared. You never told me that was a dad's superpower." And that pretty much brought an end to our subterranean adventure. Can you imagine not being able to take another step and not knowing where to turn? Feeling alone and powerless and paralyzed? Have you ever disappeared into the darkness? In the next few minutes, we're going to go through some dark places together. I can't promise you that you'll find gold at the end of our journey. My dad and I didn't find it either. But I can promise you this: you won't be alone. When we come to those unexpected dark corners, we'll navigate them together. And at the end, you will have something better than treasure. You'll have a message of hope, the kind of hope that illuminates those dark corners, the kind of hope that will help you light the way for someone else. So come back with me to 2001. George W. Bush was in the White House, Survivor was on TV, and I was in an office about 5 miles west of here. And something was wrong. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't put a name on it. But I felt stuck. I felt just as immobilized as I was in that dark tunnel. More than stuck, though, I felt like a failure. I felt like I was a failure as an engineer, as a husband, as a father. I remember saying to myself, "David, what value do you offer anyone?" To this day, I have never experienced such utter psychological darkness. I was back in that mind tunnel, except that I had two things going for me. One was a telephone, and the other was the knowledge that I could ask for help. And I feel very fortunate for having grown up in a family where it's okay to ask for help. And I realize that's not true for everyone, especially us guys. When you picture a guy picking up the phone to ask for something, it's probably what?
Pizza.
Pizza. That's what I was going to say. Power tools. We'll go with pizza. I mean, let's face it, for most guys, asking for help is right down there with asking for directions. Is it any wonder GPS was built on the work of a woman mathematician? There you go, ladies. One more century of pointing men in the right direction. But back to 2001. It was February. I remember clearly the day I was staring at that telephone, and I finally decided to pick it up. And I called the number for Arapahoe Douglas Mental Health, my county mental health agency. And not long after that, I found myself in the office of a therapist named Randy. And not long after that, I found myself in the office of a psychiatrist. And then I had my diagnosis: major depressive disorder. Disorder. In simpler terms, depression. Now, would you believe that there are people, probably not in this room, but you will encounter them, people who think that depression is not real? They put it in the same category as ghosts, UFOs, and honest roofers. Well, I'm here to tell you there are things in this life that are real and verifiable and true, whether you believe it or not. Vaccines save lives. The world is round. The Colorado Rockies once played in a World Series. I know, hard to believe. And depression is real. Now, let me remind you that I am not a mental health professional. I am not here to diagnose, to offer treatment, to make any recommendations. I'm just telling you my experience. And my experience was a diagnosis of depression and a doctor who said, David, we're going to put you on a medication that will help you get to the point where you can be an active participant in your recovery. So my recovery from depression involved medication, counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy, prayer, journaling, and the loving support of my wife, Susan. And the last 3 of those were free. But you know, when I say I was depressed, that doesn't really begin to convey the depth, the poignancy of what I was going through. So I actually went back and took a look at one of my old journals from that period, because I wanted to see how I was capturing at that time, in my own words, what I was going through. Here is an unedited journal entry from June 2001, about 3 months into my recovery. I can't find the energy or motivation to do those things I've identified as needing to be done. I think of suicide only rarely, maybe 1 or 2 times a week. But I still can't eliminate those thoughts entirely. I feel guilt and shame over the way things are going at home and at work. Things that should excite me don't. The end of school, going camping this weekend, the possibility of traveling to see a customer. I recoil from all those things. I was at least happy that my problem had been identified and I was getting treatment, but now it seems I'm not improving anymore. P.S. I'm available for children's birthday parties. Just kidding. But did you hear the impatience in my voice? I was ready to be done with this 3 months in. It was like, we've got a diagnosis. We know what to call this thing. Now let's fix it. I would come to learn that depression has its own timeline. It would be about 2 years before I felt fully functional again. And in those 2 years, there were some scary moments. Imagine this. Imagine 2 men living a few miles apart in South Metro Denver. 2 men leading oddly parallel lives. Both men in their early 40s, both married to teachers, both with good jobs in telecommunications, both with 3 kids and a house in the suburbs, one in Highlands Ranch, one in Centennial. And their lives never intersected until one dark day. And I do have to caution you, this is one of those turns where it gets very dark. Because that was the day that one of those men, who happened to be me, walked out and got his copy of the Denver Post. We used to have these things called newspapers, Google it. Brought it in, unfolded it, and read the story of the man in Highlands Ranch who the day before had died of suicide. tragically. And what was even more tragic and sadly more newsworthy was that before ending his own life, he had ended the lives of his wife and children. Have you ever read a news story that made you feel like you'd been kicked in the gut by a mule? I read that and it terrified me. It scared the you-know-what out of me because of one other little detail about those men's oddly parallel lives. You see, we'd both been in treatment for depression for about a month. Now, I've heard mental health professionals say that there is a very precarious time in recovery from severe depression that often happens about a month in, because someone who is severely depressed is likely to be experiencing what is sometimes clinically called suicidal ideation. Ideas of suicide. But when I say ideas, that's misleading. These are not fleeting notions. For some people, these ideas of suicide become all-consuming. You heard in my journal entry about my own thoughts of suicide, which fortunately did not get quite to that level, not to the level that is now referred to as living through suicidal intensity. Think about that phrase for a minute. Someone can be living through suicidal intensity. And yet, as you also heard in my journal entry, someone's experiencing severe depression can be paralyzed, unable to carry out almost any intentional action. In effect, you can have someone who is too depressed to kill themselves. Now, imagine what could happen if, in the course of recovery from depression, that paralysis begins to dissipate before that suicidal intensity releases its grip. What can happen is what happened that day in Highlands Ranch in April 2001. A suicide accompanied by additional loss of life. Now, I can't minimize that. That was a tragedy for that family, for their whole community, for everyone who knew them. But I can tell you, it was not the end of the story, because of one more little detail I read about in the Denver Post. And that was the mention of a small caliber rifle. Did you know that in the United States, 3 out of every 5 gun deaths are suicides? Empirical evidence shows that when a person is contemplating suicide, they will often act in a moment of brief but heightened vulnerability. Think about that phrase for a moment. Brief but heightened vulnerability. And if a gun is available in that moment, a suicide attempt is much more likely to be fatal. So I read that in the news story, and I knew that at that moment in my basement, wrapped in a blanket and tucked away in a corner where nobody would be likely to find it, there was a small caliber rifle. To be specific, a Ruger 22 caliber carbine that my father had bought me when I was a teenager for sport shooting. Yes, I grew up around guns. I was a 19-year-old summer camp riflery instructor. I had taught people firearm safety. And I knew there was no way I would ever use a gun with the intent to harm someone, neither me nor anyone else. But how did I know? How could I know that that gentleman in Highlands Ranch wouldn't have said the exact same thing right up to that moment of brief but heightened vulnerability. I decided I would not take that chance. I went down to the basement, I got that gun, I took it to a gun shop and sold it. One small step that might have made me and my family a little safer. So whatever we can say about the tragedy that befell that family in Highlands Ranch, it may also be true that it saved a life. Yes, there were some scary moments along the way. There were moments when I felt as immobilized as I was in that gold mine. And there were moments when, and fortunately, increasingly frequent moments over time, where I felt motivated to take action, like getting rid of that gun. Recovery from depression for me was not a linear path at all. In fact, you're probably wondering, well, David, how did you finally recover from depression? And I'm not sure I can give you a good answer. But I can tell you this, that to answer that question as best I can, we've got to introduce a new character into the story. John? We've got to introduce a new character into the story. Please direct your attention to the screen, and if you're at home, make sure your sound is up. John, can you see it in here? The young woman you saw dancing in that video, it's my daughter, Barbara. Have you ever seen a more physical embodiment of pure joy? I just love watching Barbara dance. I shot that video when my wife Susan and I visited her in Montana a few years ago. She took us to experience her favorite Saturday morning activity, which was something called Afrofusion dance. Every week they would meet and they had the live drummers and they would learn new dance moves and do those combinations for each other. And right there, you just heard three things about Montana you didn't expect to hear, right? Dance moves, live drummers, and something called Afrofusion. I love watching Barbara dance. It just lights up my soul. She has such a bright light to offer. And there was a time when that light flickered. You see, when Barbara was in high school, she was diagnosed with major clinical depression. What an inheritance, right? When you think about everything you could possibly want to pass along to your children, I'm betting that a lifelong mental disorder with possibly fatal complications is not high on your list. Well, Barbara went to work. We were so proud of her. She did the work. Her course of treatment for depression was similar to my own. It involved medication and therapy and talking to a psychiatrist and a psychologist and journaling and doing artwork. Just trying to figure out how to express what was keeping her from living that joy-filled life that you saw she's capable of. My wife and I thought, she's got this. All through her senior year of high school, we thought, she's got this. She graduated, she went off to college in the fall, and we thought, what? She's got this. One thing you need to know about Barbara is that she is an empath. She tends to feel deeply any sorrow or negative emotion surrounding her. It's why we never let her watch Titanic. Raise your hand if you have a sensitive child. Okay. Well, imagine this. At the end of Barbara's junior year in college, she had a chance to go on a trip sponsored by a history professor from her school who taught the history of the Holocaust. Imagine your sensitive child going to a little town in France and reading about the Nazi atrocities that took place there. Imagine your sensitive child going to visit Schindler's factory. Imagine your sensitive child going on to visit sites of concentration camps. And then, just to throw in another wrinkle, imagine that your sensitive child was unable to pre-fill enough of her prescriptions to get her through the entire trip. We didn't know it at the time. We thought she was doing well. She came home that summer after the trip. She didn't seem quite as fine as she usually did, but we still thought she's doing the work. She's got this. She went off to her senior year in college, and we thought, she's got a counselor, she's staying busy, she's staying on top of her classes and her activities, she's doing well. On the Saturday of Halloween weekend, November 2nd, 2013, Susan and I were sitting at home enjoying a visit from a friend who had come over. The smell of homemade pizza lingered in the air, and we were laughing about some board game we'd been playing that our friend always lost. And Susan's phone rang. She looked at it. She said, "Oh, it's Barbara calling. Hi, sweetie." It was not our sweetie. A male voice on the other end said, "Reverend Odie," my wife is a minister now, "Reverend Odie, this is Barbara's friend Willard. I'm with her at the emergency room. She swallowed some pills. They're pumping her stomach. I think I got her here in time. I think she'll be okay." I believe what I said next was something like, "Thank God Willard called us. What I wanted to say was, "Okay? By what sick, twisted definition of that word can any of this possibly be okay?" That was Saturday night. Sunday morning, 11 o'clock, time for church. And my minister wife stands in front of her congregation at Grace United Methodist Church in Billings, Montana, and she led worship. She preached a sermon. She did her best to make a joyful noise to the Lord, as the psalmist says. And at the end of that service, she stood in front of her congregation, and I stood next to her, while she explained to these people who had known our bubbly, lively, outgoing middle daughter all through her high school years that she had tried to end her life. Have you ever experienced something you just can't make sense of? Well, that afternoon, Susan got on a plane to Michigan. I, on the other hand, went to a rehearsal for a play I was opening in the next weekend. A play called August, Osage County. A play about a family that comes apart over a family member's apparent suicide. Define irony. Well, by the end of that week, Barbara was released from the hospital and Susan brought her home to spend the rest of the fall semester at home with us. She was doing the work, the counseling, the journaling, trying to come to grips with what had happened. It was quite some time after the event before Barbara was ready to say to her mom, I tried to kill myself. And Susan said, yeah, we know. And it was even some time after that before I thought Barbara was ready to answer the question that was running through my mind. And I asked her, Barbara, what was Willard doing there? She said, I called him. I said, after you took the pills, you called Willard? She said, yeah. I said, why? I didn't want to die alone. Six words. Those 6 words are forever engraved upon my heart. Imagine, here is someone experiencing a kind of pain, a level of emptiness that that I couldn't even fathom. And the people person in her couldn't stand the thought of being alone. But that's not where Barbara's story ends either. She did stay home with us the rest of that fall semester, doing the work, keeping up with her schoolwork as best she could. And come January, with some misgivings, we let her return to college for the spring semester. Oh, we had a plan in place. She had to stay in frequent contact with us. She had to continue talking to her counselor on campus. And she had to return our phone calls and our text messages promptly. Super annoying, I know. We had to know she was safe. By the grace of God and with the help of that small academic community that lifted her up and supported her, Barbara graduated with her class that spring. Barbara's doing well now. You saw her dancing 5 years later. You know what Barbara's favorite expression is? You've heard it before. She's the one I got it from. She says, Dad, you've got to feel all the feels. Feel all the feels. The ones that lift you up and the ones that threaten to pull you down. Because if you can't feel them, if you become numb to them, how can you be truly alive? As alive as that young woman you saw dancing. As alive as the young woman you're about to meet. You heard my version of her story. Now you get to hear hers. For the first time ever, it gives me great pleasure to invite her to join me on the speaking platform. Please welcome my daughter, Barbara Odie.
Take a deep breath, everyone. You know the story has a good ending. This November, it will have been 11 years since my near-fatal suicide attempt. It has taken me probably half of that time to get comfortable even calling it a suicide attempt. For a long time, I couldn't use those words to describe what had happened because I felt like it didn't accurately reflect what had happened. I was an RA in college, a resident advisor for 2.5 years, And in that position, I attended QPR gatekeeper training, which is a suicide prevention training. I did it twice. And in that training, I heard long lists, some of the things that we've heard here today, of signs to look out for. Depression, withdrawing into yourself, isolating. And at the time, I thought, well, those don't apply to me. Most people around me didn't know how much I was truly struggling with depression and anxiety. I was so good at masking it that my attempt came as a surprise to everyone who knew me. And one of my therapists later on said, "Barbara, yours was one of the scary ones. No one saw it coming." In the days and the weeks prior to my attempt, I didn't show any outward signs. I didn't immediately start giving away my possessions. I didn't talk about a plan. I didn't, write letters to loved ones or immediately seem happier with an end in sight. Instead, I went through my daily routine. I went to class. I did my research for my senior thesis. I applied to PT schools. I went to my practicum. I met with friends. I did my RA duties. I stayed so busy, sun up to well past sundown, so that I would never have to stop and think about the anxiety, the constant barrage of voices that were telling me I was not good enough, that it didn't matter what I did, it would never be enough. And so I sat in this void, and no one saw how much I was struggling. No one saw how much I just needed to hear, "You are worth more than your degree. You are worth it even if you don't go to PT school. Your life is more important than this list of your accomplishments." And so I sat in this void where a lack of emotion was more terrifying than the onslaught of all the emotions. A void where I felt like the life that I was living wasn't a life at all. And so on November 2nd, 2013, I tried to fill that void. It was not something that I had planned. It was not premeditated. In fact, I had gone through some of the mitigation strategies. I had turned over my antidepressants to my therapist. I had to check into the counseling center every day to get them. I had given my crafting scissors, my X-Acto blades, and my car keys over to my best friend, Emily. We had dumped my alcohol. I got rid of the lethal means. I lived in a very flat state, so there were no tall buildings. So that was like not even a thing that I had to consider. The only thing I had was my prescription beta blockers if my heart rate got too high. So no, it was not planned. There was not a note that I left behind. There was no concept of what would happen, how it would affect the people around me. There was just a void, an emptiness that I thought I could fill by swallowing a bottle of beta blockers. It turns out the void doesn't need to be filled. The void needs to be acknowledged. That's what this artwork is showing. Years later, I was talking to one of my therapists about my attempt, and she says, "Barbara, I notice you don't call it a suicide attempt. Why is that?" Because suicide is something that happened to other people, not to me. Because I had dissociated from my attempt. Because I could tell the story as if it happened to someone else. Or because doing so meant admitting to my own lethality, that I had tried to kill someone, me. Calling it a suicide attempt meant owning up to that lethality inside of me. And admitting that was so, and is so, antithetical to my role as an early childhood educator. I am a caregiver of these young, tiny humans who are the ultimate embodiment of life. And there was such a cognitive dissonance there, I couldn't reconcile it with who I knew myself to be. I couldn't own my story because I couldn't own up to that darkness inside of me. So why don't we talk about suicide? Because it requires us to face up to our own mortality, the uncertainty and the unknown, and to consider, even hypothetically, a world without you or me in it. And that's terrifying. And owning up to suicidal ideations, ideas, even without a plan, is even more terrifying because it means owning up to the fact that you want to kill someone. When I finally admitted my own suicidal ideations to my therapist in college, Jen, I remember distinctly seeing her eyes fill with tears. And she swallowed them down. She talked me through my safety plan. She put her own big feelings to the side so that she could validate mine without judgment or fear or shame. Jen faced the void with me. She did not shy away from the darkness. And eventually, after years of medication, therapy, EMDR, the loving support of my family and my friends, I learned not to be afraid of it either. It was years later, in my role as an early childhood educator, that I finally reached that point of acceptance, the duality of light and dark that exists in all of us. It was nap time, and I was laying next to this little 3-year-old who didn't like to nap. I had tried all of my usual tricks. I sat next to her, I modeled deep breathing. I rubbed her back, I stroked her hair, I held her little hand, nothing. Finally, I just gave up and I laid there next to her and I thought, well, she'll either sleep or she won't, but at least she's quiet. I was still holding her little hand, and all of a sudden I felt her little fingers like tickling up my arm. Kids are such sensory seekers, you know? And she brushed her little fingers over this arm where I just have the faintest self-harm scars from college. She brushed her fingers over them, and then she whispered in her little toddler voice, "You got owies?" Then she kissed the self-harm scars, and she smiled at me, and she said, "There, you all better now." I know, right? She didn't ask how I got them. She didn't see this depressed version of me. She didn't see my lethality or my attempt. She just saw me, Miss Barbara. The children in my care love me and accept me unconditionally, even when I'm grumpy or impatient or I have to use my big teacher voice with them, which, happens a lot. I help them regulate their big feelings, and more importantly, they help me regulate mine. I saw that I was good enough for them, and I learned to see and believe that I was good enough for myself, too.
Got to feel all the feels. Feeling some big feels. Feeling a lot of pride, a lot of love, and a lot of, as a speaker, envy over the connection you obviously had with this audience. And I had to come back because I never answered that question I posed earlier. How did you recover from depression? And I needed you to see how intertwined our stories are. After Barbara was doing better, I was having a conversation with Susan, and I remember saying, well, watching what Barbara is going through is holding up a mirror to my own experience. And that mirror is saying, David, you've been complacent. You need to get real about taking care of your mental health. And Susan said, you know, you listen to that mirror more than you listen to me. Raise your hand if you think sometimes facing reality can be hard. Well, I was not facing reality. I hadn't been ever since a moment about 10 years earlier when I decided I was done with depression. Yeah, I thought of my recovery as a one and done, kind of like Devo. Google it. What Barbara helped me see is that my recovery will be a lifelong process. I'll have to continue monitoring my moods and my thought processes and my coping mechanisms, as I'm sure Barbara does, just as surely as a friend of mine has to monitor his blood sugar. It's a lifelong process. So, instead of asking the question, David, how did you finally recover from depression? Maybe a better question to ask is, David, when did you recover from depression? And the answer is today. And with God's help, tomorrow and the day after. Deep breath time again. It's been quite a day, speaking of days, right? I think it's time for a little check-in. Here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to find somebody nearby to talk to. If you're at home on Zoom, I hope there is someone nearby you can talk to, because we're not going to do breakout rooms. If you're in a room, turn to someone nearby, even if it's someone you don't know. And what I would like you to do is turn to someone, look at them, and say, how are you really doing today? And your job is to listen closely enough to their answer to know whether maybe you need to continue that conversation after we're done in a few minutes. I'm going to give you 1 minute, that's 30 seconds each for you to answer the question. Go. Raise your hand if you just started a conversation that you're going to continue in a few minutes after we're done. Oh, that's great. That is great. We've been feeling some big feels this afternoon, haven't we? Yeah, you've heard from mental health professionals. You've heard some stories of pain. You've heard stories of loss. You've heard stories of near loss. And you've vicariously experienced the joy that Barbara expresses through dance. There's one more thing you need to do in order to go out and shine a light for someone else, to help them find that treasure. Raise your hand if in the last little while you have felt something. Yeah. Why do you think that is? What made you feel something? Stories. Stories have power. Power to move people. And we're not the only ones with powerful stories. You have them too. Stories of your own journey through life's ups and downs. Those stories can teach and illuminate and inspire. Those stories can shine a light in a dark corner for you, for someone else. Will you be the one to share your story? Maya Angelou said, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. So here's my challenge to you. Be vulnerable enough to share your untold story. And when you do, you keep the conversation alive. And when you keep the conversation alive, you keep hope alive. And when you keep hope alive, I'll let you finish the rest.
Thank you. Is it okay if I give you
Yeah,
a
of course.
Incredible. Thank you, you two. I know this was your first time presenting together, and it was just so impactful. So thank you. This was a great way to end an afternoon of hope. If you bear with us, we have a couple more things we want to do. First off, we want to remind people about the resources available. The afternoonofhope.com resources page has everything we talked about today. 988 is available for people struggling. If you need to, if you don't know where else to call, Corporate Counseling Associates has a crisis line available for the next 7 days specifically for this event. That's 855-242-5061. We also need to thank our sponsors again.
Yes.
So Corporate Counseling Associates, if you want to learn more about us, feel free to scan the QR code. We also have a few other sponsors. Didn't know if you want to talk about them, if you want me to.
Well, why don't you?
Okay.
I've kind of had the stage for a few minutes.
Two of our other sponsors, Centennial Peaks Hospital and Highlands Behavioral Health, have been instrumental in making today a success. And we have our first ever Unsung Hero Award, and she has no idea we're about to call her up to say thank you. So Alex, May, if you could come on up here real quick so we can say thank you to you. She has been instrumental in making today what it was. And we couldn't have done this without you. So thank you so much. We have some flowers for you.
Thank you.
Right, I really didn't have any idea.
Yeah, we didn't tell you about this at all. So let's say a quick goodbye to all of our speakers again. John, can you throw them up for us?
Yeah.
All right. Dr. Williams, thank you.
Williams.
I guess just Dr. Williams, thanks. Just kidding.
And
Jay and Jeff in New York, thank you.
In New York, thank you.
John in San Antonio, thank you. And Dr. Fry, thank you from Baltimore.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed your time with us. We've greatly enjoyed it. We appreciate you being here. This has been an afternoon of hope.
It has.
And we hope everybody feels the same way. Thank you and take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've just watched an afternoon of hope, empowering conversations and saving lives. Thank you again for joining us for an afternoon of hope.